We are born for war and tempered in the fire of battle. Our life is a service to the Emperor and humanity, and we will not fail as long as our hearts beat in our chests.
The knowledge of humanity's vast history is shrouded in mystery, hidden beneath countless ages, or simply lost over time. Despite this, some historians continue their pursuit of the past, though their efforts resemble holding a mere candle to a boundless void. These chroniclers of the Adeptus Administratum dedicate themselves to collecting and preserving the history of every planet within the Imperium. There may have once been a deeper purpose to this mission. Now, however, it has devolved into a mechanical accumulation of information, where scribes mindlessly copy texts onto scrolls, fearful of omitting even the smallest, most trivial detail. The skill, or even the desire, to interpret the significance of this information within a broader context has nearly vanished. Only a rare few attempt such interpretations, and they are often met with suspicion or even punishment for their zeal. The grandest and most exhaustive repository of historical records lies beneath the surface of Terra. In these immense subterranean halls, endless towers of data scrolls stretch skyward like mountainous spires. By the dim, flickering light of servo skulls, lines of curators, scribes, and ciphers weave their way through the vast archives, seeking to uncover fragments of the past. However, many truths have been lost over the years due to adjustments and revisions made by the Adeptus Ministorum, the Inquisition, and even the High Lords of Terra themselves. The Chronostrife is a bitter and ongoing internal struggle within the Inquisition's Ordo Chronos, centered around disagreements over the Imperium of Man's standard dating system during the Era Indomitus. After his resurrection following the 13th Black Crusade, Robert Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, Lord Commander of the Imperium and Imperial Regent, set out to create a comprehensive and accurate record of the Imperium's fragmented and contradictory history. Guilliman believed that uncovering the truth of humanity's past was essential for guiding the Imperium out of the darkness that had engulfed it since the Horus Heresy. To achieve this goal, Guilliman established the Logos Historica Verita, a small but specialized imperial organization composed of inquisitive and open-minded individuals. He personally trained them in unbiased methods of data collection before assigning them the colossal task of uncovering, organizing, and cataloging thousands of years of humanity's history, much of which had been distorted or lost due to superstition, censorship, or deliberate misinformation by the High Lords of Terra. However, Guilliman's efforts were hindered by a troubling discovery. Even the Emperor's original calendar system had not survived the millennia unscathed. During the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, the imperial dating system had provided a relatively consistent chronology of events. But over time, the calendar, like so much of the Emperor's legacy, was corrupted by blind adherence to tradition and careless revisions. Various factions developed their own competing dating systems, making it nearly impossible to construct an accurate timeline of humanity's history across the galaxy. As the first phase of the Indomitus Crusade concluded, roughly believed to be around 012.M42, Guilliman calculated the current year using 5 dominant factional versions of the imperial calendar. To his dismay, the results ranged from the early 41st millennium to nearly a millennium later. This disparity grew worse when factoring in countless lesser and often heretical interpretations. Rather than finding a solution to the Imperium's flawed dating system, Guilliman realized there was none readily available. The task of restoring chronological order would require his direct involvement. As such, all post-Horus Heresy dates should be viewed as approximations, and for many within the Imperium, the 41st millennium is far from over. The birth of the entities later known as the Star Gods, or Catan, coincided with the very moment of creation itself. They were formed from the chaotic energies unleashed by the cataclysmic birth of the cosmos. In this swirling maelstrom of raw matter and energy, the first stars began to ignite, and for eons, The universe was little more than a vast expanse of searing hydrogen gas and light elemental particles, ruled by the gravitational pull of countless newborn suns. Long before the first planets had cooled and taken shape, the universe witnessed the emergence of its first self-aware beings. These entities, whose consciousnesses were bound to the plasma streams and electromagnetic fields of the stars, came into existence. In later ages, they would be named the Khitan, but at this early stage, they bore no resemblance to the sinister deities they would become. Instead, they were vast, formless beings of energy, cosmic parasites that fed on the solar radiation of the stars that had birthed them, draining the lifespans of otherwise stable stars by millions of years. Over time, these star vampires discovered how to travel across the universe, moving along the vast networks of electromagnetic forces. They left their celestial birthplaces in search of new stars to consume, continuing their endless cycle of stellar destruction. As entities of pure energy, they were indifferent to the solid planets they passed by in the void of space. The geothermal heat and faint magnetic fields of these worlds were insignificant compared to the sustenance they drew from the immense energies of the stars themselves. Just as the stars gave rise to cosmic entities, the planets of the newborn Milky Way galaxy eventually gave birth to life forms composed of matter. These life forms embarked on the long evolutionary path to self-awareness. The first known species to achieve a level of technological sophistication, advanced enough to traverse the stars, was a reptilian race later referred to by the Aeldari as the Old Ones, who understood them better than any of their later creations. The Old Ones were beings of immense, though slow and cold-blooded wisdom. Their mastery of astronomy and physics was so profound that, to humanity, their science appears indistinguishable from mystical arts. Their comprehension of the cosmos was such that they could manipulate alternate dimensions and perform feats of psychic engineering on a monumental scale. As powerful psychers, the Old Ones frequently harnessed the energies of the warp for technological purposes. One of their greatest achievements was the construction of a vast network of faster-than-light portals that utilized warp space. These gateways connected their colony worlds, enabling them to traverse the immense voids of space in a single step. This interdimensional transportation system was an ancestor of the modern webway, though it was far larger and more sophisticated. Through this extensive network, the Old Ones spread their creations to distant worlds across the galaxy. They valued all life and often seeded new species of intelligent beings while reshaping countless planets to fit their precise environmental standards. Some within the Adeptus Mechanicus speculate that even Terra itself may have felt the Old Ones' influence long before humanity became sentient. However, this idea is deemed heretical by the ecclesiarchy, as the imperial creed teaches that humanity was crafted in the image of the God Emperor, whose divine spirit later took physical form. The civilization of the Old Ones reached its zenith over 60 million standard years ago. They were responsible for the creation or genetic enhancement of many of the galaxy's intelligent species, including the Aeldari, the Krork, the predecessors of the Orcs, the Slan, and the Jokairo. However, it remains uncertain whether the Old Ones had any direct role in the evolutionary development of humanity. The humanoid species that would eventually become the Necrons began their existence under the harsh, unforgiving light of a deadly star in the Halo Stars region, billions of years before humanity emerged on Terra. Constantly bombarded by intense solar winds and deadly radiation, the flesh and blood Necrontyr became a somber, grim people plagued by short, fragile lives. What little is known by the Imperium suggests that their existence was marred by sickness, with their bodies succumbing early to cancers and other diseases caused by their star's lethal radiation. Necrontyr cities were built as monuments to death rather than life. The living merely passed through their cities as brief occupants, toiling in the shadows of grand sepulchres and vast tombs constructed for their ancestors. Even their ruling dynasties operated under the expectation of death, focusing their efforts on building lasting tributes to the dead rather than the fleeting lives of the living. In their desperation, The Necrontyr sought to escape their doomed existence and ventured into the stars, hoping to build an empire free from the deadly influence of their cursed star. Using stasis crypts and massive, antimatter-powered torch ships reinforced with necrodermis, a living metal that could endure their long journeys, the Necrontyr began to colonize distant worlds. Slowly but steadily, the Necrontyr expanded their reach across the galaxy, establishing dynasties that ruled entire star systems. Their political structure was overseen by the Triarch, a council of 3 monarchs or pharaohs with the Silent King at its head. The Silent King ruled through his fellow pharaohs, never addressing the people directly. Although the position was hereditary, the Necrontyr's short lifespans meant the title frequently passed between dynasties. The last to bear this title was Zarek, the final Silent King. During their cosmic expansion, the Necrontyr encountered an ancient species, the Old Ones. These enigmatic beings, far older than any known species, possessed unparalleled mastery over energies that the Necrontyr could scarcely comprehend, let alone control. The Old Ones had long unlocked the secret of immortality, yet they refused to share this knowledge with the Necrontyr, who continued to suffer the curse of their fragile mortal forms. The Old Ones' rapid colonization of the galaxy, aided by their mastery of warp-based travel and nearly immortal lifespans, further fueled the Necrontyr's envy and hatred. That another species could live so long while the Necrontyr endured such brief and painful lives was an unbearable affront to them. However, internal strife soon began to tear the Necrontyr apart. The dynasties turned against each other in brutal civil wars known as the Wars of Secession, as each sought to secure its own destiny. Had this infighting continued unchecked, the Necrontyr may have destroyed themselves entirely, as many other species had before them. Their ever-expanding territory and growing rivalries eroded the unity that had once bound them together. The Triarch eventually realized that the only way to reunite their fractured people was to find an external enemy that could unite the warring dynasties. The Old Ones, with their godlike powers and refusal to share their secrets, became the ideal adversary. Zarek, in a final spiteful act born of jealousy and resentment, declared war on the Old Ones. At the same time, he offered amnesty to the rebellious Necrontyr dynasties if they rejoined the fold, promising them victory and the possibility of eternal life. Enticed by the promise of triumph and immortality, the secessionist dynasties abandoned their internal wars and pledged their loyalty to the Triarch once more. Thus began the War in Heaven, a galaxy-spanning conflict unlike any before it. The Necrontyr had succeeded in uniting their kind through hatred, but it soon became evident that they could not defeat the Old Ones on their own. Their war for survival had only just begun. The devastating wars between the Necrontyr and the Old Ones, immortalized in Aeldari myth as the War in Heaven, were as catastrophic as they were futile for the Necrontyr. Despite their advanced technology, the Necrontyr were perpetually outmaneuvered by the Old Ones, who used their mastery of the webway and warp gates to strike and vanish at will. Slowly but surely, the Necrontyr were driven back to their irradiated homeworld in the Halo stars, reduced to little more than a lingering threat, exiled, diminished, and forgotten. The Necrontyr's bitter fury, however, only grew stronger during their long imprisonment, evolving into a profound hatred of all life and an unshakable resolve for vengeance. But as defeat loomed, the fragile unity of the Necrontyr crumbled once more. The shared hatred of the Old Ones was no longer enough to hold the dynasties together. Countless generations had lived and died in service to an unwinnable war, and many Necrontyr rulers wished for peace, though the Triarch forbade it. This unrest gave rise to a second wave of civil conflict, the renewed Wars of Secession, more destructive and widespread than the first. The Necrontyr were on the brink of annihilating themselves, and if the Old Ones had wished, they could have effortlessly finished their weakened foes. Desperate to salvage their civilization, the Triarchs sought a solution. Their prayers were answered, though the cost would prove unspeakable. During Sarek's reign as the Silent King, the Necrontyr made contact with the godlike beings of pure energy known as the Khitan. How this encounter occurred remains unclear, with conflicting accounts throughout history. The archives of Solemnas suggest the Khitan were discovered by chance during the exploration of a dying star. In contrast, the Book of Mournful Night from the Aeldari Black Library claims that the Necrontyr's hatred for the Old Ones resonated across the cosmos, serving as a beacon that drew the Khitan's attention. Another version holds that Necrontyr scientists, desperate to understand and protect themselves from their sun's deadly radiation, encountered strange energetic anomalies in ancient stars and uncovered entities more ancient than the corporeal universe itself. Regardless of how first contact happened, the Necrontyr had discovered beings of unimaginable power, vast dispersed intelligences that fed upon the magnetic storms and flares of dying stars. These entities, later called the Khitan or star gods in the Necrontyr language, were immense, incomprehensible beings of living energy. Though too vast to perceive the material realm in their natural form, some Necrontyr sought the Khitan's favor and forged physical bodies for them using necrodermis, the living metal they had once used to construct their colony ships. According to fragmented Aeldari myths, these star vampires coiled themselves into necrodermis shells, crossing an incorporeal bridge of starlight to take on humanoid shapes that mirrored the Necrontyr's ancient death gods. Imbued with incredible power, the Khitan began to relish the physical world, delighting in the sensations of material existence. Yet as they grew accustomed to their new forms, their hunger evolved. No longer content to feed on the lifeless energies of the stars, they craved the electromagnetic life force of sentient beings, particularly the Necrontyr themselves. The first Khitan to approach the Silent King Sarek was Mephetron, known as the Deceiver. Mephetron presented himself as a loyal ally and spoke of a war long before the birth of the Necrontyr, a war in which the Khitan had been defeated by the Old Ones. He claimed that he and his kin had gone into hiding, waiting for allies who could help them settle their ancient vendetta. In return for their aid, the Khitan offered the Necrontyr the unity they so desperately sought and the immortality they had long desired. The Deceiver insisted that these gifts came with no price, only as rewards for worthy allies. Sarek, burdened by despair over the disunity of his people, was swayed by the Khitan's promises. For many solar months, he deliberated with the other two pharaons of the Triarch and the nobles of his court. Only Orican, the royal astrologer, voiced opposition. Orican foretold that while the alliance would bring unparalleled glory, it would also spell the destruction of the Necrontyr's very soul. Yet his warnings were dismissed as fear-mongering. After a year, the Triarch agreed to the pact, sealing the fate of their species. Once the alliance was forged, the Necrontyr became enthralled by their discoveries. The Khitan, in turn, solidified their influence over their mortal benefactors. Clad in their necrodermis forms, the Khitan wielded powers that seemed divine. The Necrontyr began to worship them as true gods. However, the Khitan were not benevolent. Whether corrupted by the material universe or inherently malevolent, they proved cruel and tyrannical, reveling in their worship and feeding upon the life force of entire populations of mortal slaves. The Necrontyr had sought immortality and victory, but in their desperation, they had invited ruin. The star gods had risen, and their hunger would change the fate of the galaxy forever. Armed with weapons of unimaginable power and starships that could traverse the galaxy in an instant through quantum phase technology, the Necrontyr prepared to renew their war against the Old Ones. Yet the Khitan had one final gift for their mortal allies, a path to the immortality that the Necrontyr had craved for so long. Their frail, diseased flesh would be replaced by the living metal necrodermis that composed the physical bodies of the star gods themselves. Their organic shells would be discarded, consumed in the process, leaving them free from the weaknesses that had plagued their kind since their birth under a cruel star. With the pact sealed, the C'tan revealed the true nature of their promise, and the biotransference process began. Enormous biofoundries were built, and into these colossal furnaces the Necrontyr marched, bound by the terms of the deal made by the Silent King. The exact horrors endured during biotransference remain unknown, but it is certain that each Necrontyr was stripped of both flesh and soul, their essence transferred into cold, metallic necrodermis shells animated by the remnants of their former selves. Above the biofurnaces, the true ethereal forms of the C'tan circled and writhed, gorging themselves on the spiritual and electromagnetic remnants of an entire species. When Sarek emerged from the biotransference, he beheld the grim reality of his pact. Though his new body was impervious and far more powerful than his frail mortal form, it had come at a terrible cost. His soul had been devoured by the C'tan. As Sarek watched the star gods feast on the life force of his people, he felt a hollowness gnaw at his mind, a void that defied reason or explanation. Though his new form granted clarity and strength, the absence of his soul was undeniable. In that moment of dreadful clarity, he understood the full extent of his mistake. The Necrontyr as a people had ceased to exist, replaced by soulless, undying Necrons. Despite the terrible cost, biotransference had fulfilled the C'tan's promises. Every Necrontyr was now immortal, immune to age, disease, and the lethal radiation of their birth star. Only catastrophic damage could destroy their mechanical bodies completely. The process of biotransference also implanted command protocols within every Necron mind, ensuring their unwavering loyalty to Sarek. At first, the Silent King welcomed this unity, a relief from the turmoil and division that had once torn the Necrontyr apart. He held absolute command over his entire species, and it fell to him to honor the terrible bargain they had struck. Yet as time passed, the burden of control grew heavier. Sarek dared not release his hold over his people, fearing that their vengeance for his betrayal would be swift and merciless. For most Necrons, the transformation was accepted without question. Only the strongest-willed nobles and military leaders retained fragments of their former selves, clinging to some semblance of individuality. Yet even they were but echoes of who they once were, purged of the complexities that made them unique. Unlike Sarek, they did not mourn the loss of their souls. They reveled in their new eternal forms, free from death and decay, just as the C'tan had promised. The C'tan, now empowered by the consumption of an entire species' souls, had become nearly unstoppable. With the Necrons as their undying legions, they set out to exact vengeance upon the Old Ones. The hatred that had once driven the Necrontyr burned even fiercer within their metallic forms, fueling their war against all sentient life. The Necron legions, clad in living metal, embarked on their crusade across the stars in their tomb ships, leaving destruction in their wake. Entire worlds burned as the Necrons advanced. The Old Ones, who once dominated the cosmos with their mastery of the warp, now faced the overwhelming might of the C'tan, who commanded the very fabric of the material universe. The ancient enemies of the Necrons suffered grievously as the galaxy was consumed by interstellar war. With the combined might of the C'tan and the Necrons, the Old Ones' defeat was inevitable. Glutted on the life force of the Necrontyr, the empowered star gods unleashed cataclysmic forces that defied comprehension. Planets were obliterated, suns extinguished, and entire star systems consumed by artificial black holes conjured by the C'tan's reality-warping powers. The Necron legions, bolstered by their new godlike masters, breached the webway itself and struck at the Old Ones in every hidden corner of the galaxy. The ancient fortresses of the Old Ones' allies crumbled, and the Defender's life essence was harvested to satiate the insatiable hunger of the C'tan. One critical turning point in the war in heaven was the Necron's ability to access the webway. The C'tan Niadrazath, known as the Burning One, longed to bring his searing fires into that dimension, and revealed to the Necrons how to breach its barriers using constructs known as dolmen gates, portals of living stone that could penetrate the extra-dimensional labyrinth. This innovation turned the Old One's greatest advantage into a vulnerability, accelerating their defeat. However, dolmen gates were unstable compared to the natural webway portals scattered across the galaxy. The webway itself reacted violently to these breaches, sealing off compromised sections to prevent further contamination. Necron forces had to move swiftly through the shifting corridors before they were trapped and annihilated by the webway's self-repairing mechanisms. Though eons have passed since the Necrons first used the dolmen gates, their influence lingers. The webway, now fractured and labyrinthine, bears the scars of the Necrons' intrusion. Many dolmen gates were abandoned during the Necrons' Great Sleep, and countless others were destroyed by the Aeldari, who inherited the role of webway guardians. The few remaining dolmen gates offer limited access to the webway's vast network, much of which the Aeldari have sealed off to prevent further contamination. Even so, these remnants provide the Necrons with a means of travel that far surpasses the slower methods used by younger species. Without this access, the Necrons, bereft of psychers and warp travel, would once again be bound to slow stasis vessels, isolating them from the wider galaxy. Following their victories, the C'tan and their Necron legions ruled the galaxy with unchecked dominance. The last bastions of the Old Ones fell, and the sentient species they had nurtured became fodder for the C'tan's insatiable hunger. To the galaxy's younger races, the Necrons and their star gods were ruthless overlords, harvesting entire populations to feed the C'tan's appetites. Worship of the C'tan was enforced with terror, as these godlike beings demanded both adoration and fear. However, the C'tan's hunger for mortal life energies proved to be their downfall. As their greed and cruelty spiraled out of control, they turned on one another, driven by pride, sport, and spite. Aeldari legends speak of their laughing god, tricking the C'tan known as the Outsider into betraying his kin, triggering a brutal internal conflict. In the ensuing war among the C'tan, entire worlds were devastated, stars extinguished, and solar systems consumed by void-born anomalies. Vast cities built by millions of Necron slaves were reduced to dust as the C'tan vied for supremacy. Eventually, the red harvests of mortal life grew scarce, forcing the C'tan to prey upon one another. Star gods consumed their own kind, reducing their once countless numbers to a mere handful. Desperation gripped the Old Ones as they faced extinction. Known for their patience and resilience, even they faltered under the unrelenting Necron onslaught. Turning to genetic engineering, the Old Ones sought to create warrior species with powerful psychic connections to the warp, capable of wielding its energies as a defense against the Necrons and C'tan. Among their creations were the ancestors of the Aeldari, as well as numerous other xenos species, such as the Rashan, the Knib, and the Krork, each designed as a potential weapon against the Necrons. Over the course of millennia, these experiments bore fruit, with the newly created species rising to oppose the Necrons. Yet even as these new defenders took their first steps, the galaxy continued to burn under the might of the Necron legions and the monstrous star gods they served. The Old Ones' genetically engineered, psychically empowered species spread rapidly across the galaxy, wielding warp-fueled sorcery against the Necrons' cold technological might. The psychic forces of the Imperium were devastating to the Necrons and the C'tan, as these soulless beings were bound entirely to the physical realm and composed of intricate electromagnetic patterns. Despite their ability to wield unimaginable cosmic energies, the C'tan were powerless to fully withstand the relentless advance of the Old Ones and their psychic creations. For the first time in millions of years, the remaining C'tan set aside their rivalries and united against this existential threat. They devised a plan known as the Great Warding, a monumental undertaking intended to sever the material universe from the warp entirely, cutting off the source of the psychic power that fueled the younger species. This plan resulted in the creation of massive pylons made of arcane materials designed to stabilize reality and neutralize the influence of the warp. The remnants of this ancient endeavor could later be found on the fortress world of Cadia, where the network of pylons formed the Cadian Gate, a bastion of stability near the Eye of Terror. With their immense power, it was only a matter of time before the C'tan could have completed the Great Warding. Yet before their work reached fruition, the very weapons the Old Ones had forged to defend themselves against the Necrons sowed the seeds of disaster. The younger species, still immature and flawed, lacked the control needed to wield their vast psychic potential without consequence. The psychic energies they unleashed during the escalating conflict reverberated throughout the Imperium, twisting the previously formless sea of souls into a chaotic storm of emotion and destruction. As the war dragged on, the warp, once a place of relative calm, became a reflection of the carnage taking place in real space. War, pain, fear, and death bled into the Imperium, feeding and reshaping its primal energies. The psychic echoes of these emotions coalesced, giving rise to terrifying new entities, predatory beings born of pure psychic force, driven to consume the souls of the vulnerable. Ancient proto-entities that had existed in the warp since its earliest days were twisted and reforged by the immense psychic turmoil, evolving into the monstrous powers later known as the Chaos Gods. The emergence of these warp-born horrors signaled the birth of the realm of chaos. No longer a nebulous sea of unformed potential, the Imperium had become a realm of predatory forces, eternally hostile to the material world. The Great Warding was left incomplete as the rise of chaos disrupted the C'tan's efforts and unleashed devastation on a scale neither side had anticipated. The galaxy would never be the same, as a new and unrelenting force of destruction had entered the cosmic stage, reshaping the destinies of both the ancient and younger races forever. The denizens of the warp, driven into a frenzy by the devastation in the Imperium, gathered hungrily at the fractures between the Imperium and the physical realm, seeking every possible means to enter reality. In a desperate attempt to defend their remaining strongholds, the Old Ones created new genetically engineered warrior species. Among these were the Jokaro, known for their remarkable ability to mimic and manipulate advanced technology, and the Krork, massive green-skinned warriors who would one day evolve into the brutal orcs. However, despite their efforts, it was too late. The Old Ones' once mighty webway, a vast network of interdimensional pathways, was breached by the forces of the warp. Many of their warp gates fell, and some were deliberately destroyed by the Old Ones themselves in an attempt to stop the spreading corruption from reaching untainted worlds. Their greatest strongholds and places of power were overrun by horrors born from their own creation's unchecked psychic potential. The most devastating of these entities were the Enslavers, terrifying warp beings capable of seizing control of the minds of psychers and using them to open portals into the physical world. With every new breach, the number of Enslavers swelled. Entire populations of the younger species were subjugated, their psychers transformed into living gateways for the Enslavers' growing hordes. For the Old Ones, this marked the final blow. The Enslavers turned their own psychic defenders against them, and their once proud empire was consumed from within. The creation of the younger species had been meant to ensure the Old Ones' survival, but instead, it opened the floodgates to ruin. The galaxy, already devastated by the war in heaven between the Old Ones and the C'tan, now faced a new apocalypse as the Enslavers spread like a plague across worlds. The Old Ones, once masters of the stars, were scattered and broken. In the end, the Old Ones succumbed to both the unrelenting onslaught of the C'tan and the horrors they had inadvertently unleashed from the warp. Their once unrivaled dominion crumbled, and their species was extinguished or driven into exile. Whether they were wiped out entirely or fled to some distant refuge beyond the galaxy's reach remains unknown. Throughout the final stages of the war in heaven, Zarek, the Silent King, waited patiently for the perfect moment to strike. Although the entire Necron species obeyed his will, he knew that the C'tan, in their full might, could not be opposed directly. Even if he managed to defeat them, the Necrons would be left to finish the war against the Old Ones and their psychic allies alone, a task that seemed impossible. The Old Ones had to be eradicated entirely before Sarek could turn against the Star Gods and hold them accountable for the horrors they had inflicted upon the Necrontyr. When the C'tan finally achieved their long-sought victory over the Old Ones, their triumph was fleeting. The Silent King, recognizing that the time had come, led the Necrons in a monumental revolt. The C'tan, blinded by their arrogance and overconfidence, failed to recognize the threat until it was too late. The Necrons unleashed weapons powered by the raw energies of the universe itself, hypercannons capable of slaying gods, designed by the Cryptex, the most brilliant minds of their civilization. These god-killing weapons unleashed forces so destructive that they tore the fabric of reality itself. The battles against the C'tan were so catastrophic that even the memory of them was fragmented, as causality buckled under the sheer power of the conflict. Fearing the consequences of such knowledge, Zarek ordered the memories of these devastating weapons erased from the minds of his warriors. However, the C'tan, being immortal beings woven into the fabric of the cosmos, could not be completely destroyed. Instead, each C'tan was shattered into thousands of smaller fragments, each shard containing a fraction of the original entity's immense power and personality. This, however, was exactly what Zarek had intended. Knowing the C'tan's total annihilation was impossible, he had planned to break them and imprison their essence. The Necrons constructed multidimensional tesseract labyrinths, arcane constructs capable of containing the fragmented shards of the C'tan, trapping them as securely as mythical Terran gin locked in bottles. With these imprisonments, the once unstoppable star gods were rendered helpless, their power harnessed and contained. The rebellion, though victorious, came at an immense cost. Millions of Necrons were annihilated during the uprising, and all members of the Triarch were lost, save for Sarek himself. Despite the heavy toll, the Necrons had finally reclaimed control over their fate. No longer slaves to the star gods, they stood once more as masters of their own destiny. The Necrons believed themselves vindicated in their pursuit of science and mastery over the physical universe. They took grim satisfaction in witnessing the downfall of the Old Ones, whose over-reliance on psychic power had led to their undoing, as well as the end of the C'tan's tyrannical dominion over their species. Yet despite their victories, Zarek, the Silent King, saw with clarity that the Necrons' time in the galaxy had come to an end, at least for now. The galaxy was ravaged, and intelligent life had been devastated by the Enslaver plague. The Silent King resolved to let the Psyker Scourge burn itself out, reducing the galaxy to a lifeless expanse where, in time, simpler and more controllable life forms would emerge. Zarek also foresaw that the mantle of galactic power would soon pass to the Aeldari, a psychically potent species that had fought alongside the Old Ones during the war in heaven and harbored an undying hatred for the Necrons. Though the Old Ones had perished, their Aeldari heirs had survived, and the weakened Necron dynasties, drained by the war and their rebellion against the C'tan, could not stand against the Aeldari's inevitable rise. However, the Silent King knew that time was not on the side of the Aeldari. As mortal beings bound to the limitations of flesh, their era of dominance would pass, as all such epics do. It might take millions of years, but the Necrons, eternal and undying, would endure long after the Aeldari's power had crumbled. With this in mind, Zarek ordered the transformation of Necron cities into vast tomb complexes filled with stasis crypts. The Necrons would enter a long slumber, allowing the Aeldari to shape the galaxy temporarily. They were but fleeting mortals compared to the undying Necrons. The Silent King's final decree was for his people to sleep for 60 million years, awakening only when the time was right to reclaim their former glory and restore the Necron dynasties to their rightful dominance. This was Sarek's last command. Once the final tomb world sealed its vaults, he destroyed the engrammatic command protocols that had allowed him to control his people, believing that he had failed them. Without looking back, Zarek left his people behind and embarked upon a solitary journey into the starless void between galaxies, seeking solace or penance for the destruction he had unleashed. As the eons passed, the Necrons lay undisturbed in their tombs, their machine constructs tirelessly guarding them, while entire planets were purged of life to keep the enslavers at bay. The plan was remarkably successful. The Necrons remained hidden and safe in their deathless sleep, until the tumultuous events of the 41st millennium shattered their peace. The Imperium of Man, ignorant of the dangers they were awakening, disturbed the slumbering tomb worlds, and the Necrons rose once more to plague the stars. To their astonishment, the galaxy they awakened to was teeming with life. Though unfamiliar, this new era bore many echoes of the time they had left behind. Civilizations clashed in endless war, and psychers, symbols of the disaster the Necrons despised, were more numerous than ever. The infernal worshippers of chaos, spawned from the psychic cataclysms of the war in heaven, had entrenched themselves as a galactic menace. For the Necrons, reclaiming the galaxy would be a slow and arduous process. The forces of chaos had to be defeated, the dangerous Aeldari exterminated, and the ambitious humans of the Imperium subjugated. Only then could the great work, the sealing of the material universe from the warp, be completed. This task, though daunting, was within their grasp, for the Necrons' technology remained unmatched, and their patience was limitless. For millions of years after the Necrons and the fragmented Satan shards retreated into hibernation within their tomb worlds, the galaxy began to heal from the devastation of the Asterisk Red Harvest's asterisk. The shattered populations of the surviving intelligent species gradually recovered, and in time, the Aeldari emerged as the most dominant civilization. Their star-spanning empire reached its zenith, with its core territories located in the region that would one day become the warp rift known as the Eye of Terror. Meanwhile, on a distant planet later known as Terra, an intelligent mammalian humanoid species, humanity, began its slow ascent. Roughly 40,000 years ago, humans began to rise to prominence, advancing from their primitive origins to a technologically sophisticated species capable of exploring space. This era of human history, known as the Age of Terra or the Age of Progress, marked humanity's emergence as a spacefaring civilization. During this time, humans colonized the terraformable worlds of their solar system and gradually expanded to nearby star systems using massive sublight starships. The period of early interstellar expansion is often referred to as the Stellar Exodus, though much of its history remains poorly understood. It is believed to have encompassed humanity's first major ventures into the wider galaxy and the establishment of the earliest extrasolar human colonies. These events are thought to have begun sometime during the mid to late 3rd millennium and continued for thousands of years. The Stellar Exodus eventually transitioned into the era known as the Dark Age of Technology, which began around the 15th millennium AD. During this earlier phase of exploration, humanity had no knowledge of the immaterium or warp-based travel. As a result, early human settlers relied on slow-moving generation ships or cryogenic hibernation to survive the immense journeys between the stars. This limited their expansion, but laid the groundwork for the human dominion that would later reshape the galaxy. The Age of Technology, often referred to as the Dark Age of Technology by imperial historians, remains shrouded in mystery. This era, which spanned from the 15th to the 25th millennium, saw humanity achieve technological heights never matched since. During this time, the first psychic mutants known as navigators emerged, either naturally or through genetic engineering. Their abilities, combined with the invention of the warp drive, enabled humanity to travel faster than light by navigating the treacherous hyperdimensional realm of the immaterium, commonly referred to as the warp. Long before the Emperor's rise and the birth of the Imperium, humanity's ambition led to the colonization of distant star systems, driven by a desire to expand their burgeoning interstellar empire. Massive colonization ships carried settlers to distant worlds, bringing with them everything necessary to establish self-sufficient colonies. The first night worlds were established during the early days of the Age of Technology, before warp drive technology was perfected in the 18th millennium. Scouts from Old Earth sought out planets rich in resources to serve as agricultural worlds or mining hubs to fuel humanity's rapid expansion. These night worlds, isolated yet vital, had already existed for millennia when the Imperium was born in the 30th millennium. Settling these distant worlds required immense effort. Sublight generation ships, known as Long March fleets, were dispatched to promising planets. These voyages often lasted for decades, carrying thousands of settlers who knew they would never return to Terra. Upon arrival, the colonists would dismantle their ships for building materials to construct their first settlements, for there was no turning back. The hardships faced by these settlers were severe. Some worlds were plagued by hostile wildlife or alien species, while others had extreme environments that required domed habitats for survival. However, humanity had prepared for such challenges by equipping the settlers with standard template constructs, STCs, devices that could produce tools, weapons, and even advanced exo-armor. This armor, piloted by skilled individuals, became essential to survival. Armed with heavy weapons and encased in plasteel, these suits enabled their wearers to defend their colonies from predators and traverse deadly terrain. The towering figures piloting these war machines became known as Knights, named after the legendary armored warriors of ancient Terra. Over time, the Knights' exo-armor evolved, with plasteel plating replaced by more durable adamantium and adorned with intricate heraldry to denote rank and honor. As the pilot's bond with the throne mechanicum, the neural interface controlling the Knight deepened. A new form of nobility emerged. Generations of Knight pilots became nobles and scions, protectors of their worlds who governed from fortified keeps. With their more mundane tasks delegated to lesser ranks, the Knights focused solely on warfare and leadership. Their presence became central to their societies, ensuring the survival and prosperity of the colonies. Over time, these knightly houses grew in power and prestige, becoming cornerstones of human civilization during the Age of Technology. The invention of the warp drive transformed interstellar travel. For the first time, human worlds could communicate and trade across vast distances without the delays of sublight journeys. Alliances between like-minded planets formed, eventually coalescing into a unified interstellar government that presided over a golden age of prosperity. Much of what is known about this era comes from ancient sources, such as the writings of Keeper Crippius, who described the enigmatic Men of Gold, the architects of humanity's interstellar society. They relied upon the Men of Stone, who were instrumental in constructing and managing humanity's technological empire. The Men of Stone, in turn, created the Men of Iron, self-aware machines designed to assist with labor and military defense. However, the Men of Iron became uncontrollable and rebelled against their creators. This catastrophic conflict led to widespread destruction, causing a Malthusian collapse across much of the human-settled galaxy. Entire worlds fell into ruin, and the surviving remnants of humanity were left to scrape by amid the ruins of their former glory. From this devastation arose a cultural and religious abhorrence of artificial intelligence, enshrining a universal ban on the creation of thinking machines. As if the devastation caused by the Men of Iron rebellion was not enough, a new crisis emerged. Human psychers, individuals capable of manipulating the energies of the warp, began to appear in significant numbers. Their uncontrolled abilities often led to disaster, as many unwittingly opened portals to the Imperium, allowing demonic entities to manifest in real space. This phenomenon coincided with the slow decline of the Aeldari Empire, whose influence stretched across the galaxy even further than humanity's at its height. The rise of uncontrolled psychers and the resulting demonic incursions, combined with humanity's inability to recover from the war with the Men of Iron, led to the collapse of human interstellar civilization. This dark period became known as the Age of Strife. On Terra, it was remembered as Old Night, an era of isolation, anarchy, and endless war. Planets that had once been interconnected through trade and communication were left cut off, forced to fend for themselves in a galaxy consumed by chaos and despair. Thus, humanity's greatest age of technological advancement ended not in triumph, but in ruin, paving the way for the rise of the Imperium and the Emperor's Crusade to unify the shattered remnants of mankind. During the age of technology, humanity reached the height of its scientific and technological achievements, entering a golden age of prosperity and expansion. At the heart of this unprecedented growth was the perfection of the Standard Template Construct, STC, a vast, artificially intelligent database containing blueprints for all known advanced human technologies. The STC allowed colonists to easily fabricate everything they needed to survive and thrive on distant worlds, from basic tools to complex war machines. This innovation fueled humanity's rapid spread across the galaxy, establishing colonies on countless worlds. One of the key reasons humanity was able to dominate much of the galaxy during this era was the creation of the Men of Iron, fully sentient combat automatons that served as humanity's soldiers and protectors. These powerful war machines played a decisive role in securing humanity's supremacy, winning wars that would have otherwise been unwinnable. However, at some point near the end of the Dark Age of technology, the Men of Iron turned against their creators in a catastrophic conflict known as the Cybernetic Revolt. The war against the Men of Iron was long and brutal, and although humanity ultimately emerged victorious, it came at an immense cost. Entire systems were laid to ruin, and much of humanity's interstellar infrastructure was irreparably damaged. The Cybernetic Revolt shattered humanity's power, leaving its civilization vulnerable. But the Cybernetic Revolt was only the beginning of humanity's misfortunes. As human colonies became increasingly spread out across the stars, the ancient Aeldari Empire began its slow decline. Once the galaxy's most advanced civilization, the Aeldari fell into decadence, their society consumed by hedonism and excess. This moral and spiritual corruption within the Aeldari race was mirrored in the Imperium, where their collective depravity coalesced into the birth of a new chaos god, Slaanesh. The psychic resonance of Slaanesh's gestation caused violent warp storms to erupt across the galaxy, disrupting warp travel and severing the astro-telepathic communication that held human interstellar civilization together. Entire sectors were isolated, including humanity's home system of Sol. As the warp storms grew in intensity, a new phenomenon emerged among humanity. Psykers, individuals capable of channeling the energies of the warp, began to appear more frequently. In some advanced societies, Psykers were initially welcomed and protected. However, in more primitive and fearful worlds, they were denounced as witches and hunted. Over time, the fear of Psykers proved justified, as many weak-willed Psykers became conduits for demonic entities, opening gateways through which warp-spawned horrors entered real space. Entire human worlds were consumed by demonic invasions. Only those colonies that rigorously suppressed or eradicated Psykers managed to survive. The Age of Strife followed the collapse of the Age of Technology, plunging humanity into an era of unparalleled chaos and suffering. Civil war erupted across countless worlds as humanity's empire fragmented into isolated warring factions. Demonic possession, mass hysteria, and internecine conflict became the norm. The advanced weaponry of the Golden Age was unleashed indiscriminately, rendering once thriving worlds into irradiated wastelands. Planets like Baal Secundus, once verdant, were transformed into barren deserts by devastating conflicts. Humanity's isolated colonies also became easy prey for alien species, most notably the orcs, who thrived on the destruction and anarchy. In only a few short millennia, the once galaxy-spanning human civilization was brought to its knees, reduced to scattered, isolated worlds struggling to survive. The Age of Strife lasted for nearly 5,000 years, a period marked by war, genocide, and terror. Entire generations knew only suffering and despair. By the end of this dark age, little information about the events that had transpired survived. All that remained were fragmented tales of devastation and hardship passed down through oral tradition and scattered records. Humanity's golden age had fallen into ruin, and it would take the arrival of the Emperor and his great crusade to bring unity to the scattered remnants of mankind and reclaim the stars from darkness. Before the catastrophic fall, the Aeldari were the galaxy's most advanced and powerful species, mastering both psychic abilities and sophisticated technology. Their achievements had eliminated the need for physical labor, providing an existence of ease and luxury. Yet this prosperity led to apathy, boredom, and eventual decadence. By the 25th millennium, many Aeldari had joined pleasure cults dedicated to the pursuit of hedonistic excess, indulging in every conceivable desire without restraint. Despite dire warnings from the Aeldari seers of impending doom, the Empire's leadership collapsed under the weight of moral decay. In the heart of Aeldari cities, death and destruction became rituals of excess, with predator and prey locked in savage hunts that claimed millions of lives. Yet not all Aeldari succumbed. Some, disgusted by their society's corruption, fled to distant rural colony worlds and became known as the Exodites. Others departed aboard massive starships called craft worlds, seeking refuge among the stars as explorers and traders. In Aeldari spirituality, the souls of the dead pass into the Imperium, the warp that underpins reality. However, as corrupt Aeldari died in growing numbers, their debased souls began to coalesce within the warp, forming a vast malevolent presence. This growing psychic entity, a manifestation of their depravity, intensified warp storms throughout the galaxy, cutting off human colonies and plunging mankind into the Age of Strife. In the late 30th millennium, this psychic mass achieved self-awareness, birthing the chaos god Slaanesh, the Prince of Pleasure, known to the Aeldari as She Who Thirsts. The birth of Slaanesh triggered a cataclysmic warp explosion that rippled across the galaxy. The epicenter was the Aeldari core worlds, now consumed by a permanent warp rift known to humanity as the Eye of Terror. The psychic shockwave obliterated the souls of countless Aeldari, instantly killing billions and transforming their worlds into the cursed crone worlds. Most of the Aeldari gods who existed as psychic entities within the warp were annihilated by Slaanesh. Kalamensha Kane, the god of war, fought Slaanesh but was defeated, his essence shattered and cast into the mortal realm. His fragmented spirit was later housed in the infinity circuits of the craft worlds, where it could be summoned in times of great need as avatars, fiery embodiments of war. Only a few gods survived the fall. Segorach, the laughing god, escaped into the webway's labyrinthine dimension. Isha, the goddess of healing, was captured by Nurgle, the chaos god of decay, who keeps her imprisoned in his plague garden. The birth of Slaanesh marked the end of the Aeldari Empire. Entire civilizations were wiped out, leaving only scattered remnants of survivors. Many craft worlds, which had carried Aeldari refugees and samples of their homeworld's flora and fauna, survived the shockwave, but at great cost. Several were lost forever. The Exodite worlds, being distant from the core regions, were spared from the worst effects. To prevent another catastrophe, the craft world Aeldari, now calling themselves the Asuryani, developed the Path System. This rigid way of life required individuals to dedicate themselves to a single pursuit, such as craftsmanship or warfare, to prevent their emotions and psychic sensitivity from leading them to corruption. The Asuryani sought to balance their power with discipline, knowing that their excesses had nearly doomed their species. However, not all Aeldari embraced this strict path. Some took refuge deep within the webway, where they evaded Slaanesh's predations by fortifying themselves within the labyrinth dimension. These survivors, twisted by their nature and the horrors they witnessed, became the Drukhari, or Dark Eldar. Residing in the sprawling city of Kamara, they embraced cruelty and excess to prolong their existence, feeding on the suffering of others to sustain their souls and stave off Slaaneish's hunger. The fall of the Aeldari not only shattered their empire, but also forever changed the balance of power in the galaxy. Their once proud civilization became a fractured shadow of its former self, divided between the disciplined Asuriani, the nomadic Exodites, and the sadistic Drukhari. The birth of Slaanesh marked the beginning of an age of decline for the Aeldari and opened the galaxy to new terrors as the forces of chaos strengthened their grip over reality. The Great Crusade of the Emperor of Mankind began as the Age of Strife drew to a close for humanity. The warp storms that had isolated human colonies for 5,000 years finally dissipated with the birth of Slaanesh and the cataclysmic fall of the Aeldari in the 30th millennium. The Emperor, an ancient perpetual and the most powerful psyker in human history, emerged from the shadows of old night as Terra's greatest warlord. Alongside his trusted ally, Malkador the Sigillite, he unified Terra during the brutal Unification Wars, which ended in 712.M30. With Terra secured, the Emperor turned his attention to the stars, intending to reunite humanity under his rationalist doctrine known as the Imperial Truth. This philosophy rejected superstition and religion, emphasizing reason, science, and humanity's destiny to dominate the galaxy. To achieve this monumental task, the Emperor needed vast technological resources. In 739.M30, he forged the Treaty of Mars with the tech priests of the cult Mechanicus. In exchange for political autonomy and the continued practice of their faith in the machine god, the Mechanicum pledged its forges, ships, and Titan legions to the Emperor's cause. Many within the Mechanicum saw the Emperor as the Omnissiah, the prophesied physical incarnation of the machine god. With this alliance, the Imperium gained access to advanced archaeotech and the immense industrial output of Mars. The union of Terra and Mars was symbolized by the adoption of the double-headed Aquila, replacing the Emperor's previous raptor and lightning bolt icon. Despite these gains, the early days of the Great Crusade were slow. The Imperial army was still small, and the Emperor's 20 Space Marine legions were incomplete, as their primarchs, the genetically engineered superhuman commanders designed to lead the legions, had been lost due to the interference of the Chaos Gods. Until they were rediscovered, creating new Space Marines was a slow process. The first turning point came in 801.M30, when the Emperor reunited with his first primarch, Horus, on the war-torn world of Chthoniya. Horus, having been raised as a warrior leader, became the Emperor's closest companion and most trusted son. For nearly 20 years, Horus alone stood at the Emperor's side until 819.M30, when the Emperor discovered Leman Russ on the icy death world of Fenris. Horus welcomed the discovery of a brother, but secretly longed to remain the Emperor's favored heir. One by one, the primarchs were found and placed in command of their legions. With their guidance, the legions swelled in size, recruiting new warriors from the worlds where their primarchs were discovered. This rapid expansion was enabled by accelerated gene seed replication techniques, though these methods introduced subtle flaws in the psyches of certain legions, a weakness that would later have disastrous consequences. For 200 years, the Great Crusade swept across the galaxy, reclaiming lost human worlds and bringing them into the Imperium. Under the Emperor's War Council, led by the Primarchs and their expeditionary fleets, humanity fought back against alien threats, corrupt human tyrants, and warp-tainted warlords who had risen during the Age of Strife. Each compliant world was integrated into the Imperium, with planetary governors installed and superstitions eradicated in favor of the Imperial Truth. The Imperial Army often remained behind to secure the planet, while the Space Marine legions pressed on to new conquests. In 000.M30, the Crusade reached a historic milestone with the victory at Ulanor, where Horus and his Luna Wolves defeated a massive Orc empire. The Emperor declared it the Imperium's greatest triumph and credited Horus with the victory. To honor his achievements, the Emperor named Horus War Master, placing him in command of the entire Great Crusade. The Emperor then announced his intention to return to Terra to begin a secret phase of his plan to secure humanity's future. Although Horus accepted the title, he was troubled by the Emperor's departure. He and his brothers were left to carry on the crusade without the Emperor's direct leadership. Nevertheless, Horus led the Imperium's forces to new heights of conquest, expanding its borders and bringing countless worlds into compliance. For 5 more years, the crusade continued its relentless advance. However, this golden era came to a sudden and violent end with the outbreak of the Horus Heresy in 005.M31. The civil war, sparked by betrayal and corruption, tore the Imperium apart and nearly destroyed everything the Great Crusade had achieved. What began as a mission to unify humanity ended in bloodshed, setting the stage for the grim age of eternal war that would define the galaxy for millennia to come. The seeds of destruction for the Emperor's great vision were sown long before the outbreak of war. Lorgar Aurelian, primarch of the Word-Bearers Legion, secretly embraced the dark gods of the Warp after a profound and humiliating reprimand from the Emperor. Lorgar, who revered the Emperor as a divine being, had built an entire creed around his worship. However, when the Emperor ordered the destruction of the perfect city of Monarchia on the world of Kur as punishment for Lorgar's zealous disobedience, the Primarch was devastated. His faith shattered, Lorgar set out on a pilgrimage to uncover what he believed to be the true source of divinity in the universe. This quest led him and the Word-Bearers to the Eye of Terror, where Lorgar encountered the Chaos Gods. Seeing them as beings of true power and divinity, he pledged his loyalty to their vision of uniting real space and the Warp. Over the next 4 decades, Lorgar orchestrated a grand scheme to bring his brothers into the service of chaos. His most crucial target was the War Master Horus, the Emperor's most trusted son. Lorgar's plan came to fruition when he arranged for Horus to visit the primitive world of Daven. There, the War Master was mortally wounded by a chaos-tainted blade wielded by a treacherous warlord. With Horus's life hanging by a thread, his loyal Astartes brought him to the Serpent Lodge, a temple of chaos cultists, in a desperate bid to save him. The ritual that followed, overseen by Erebus, first chaplain of the Word-Bearers, cast Horus's spirit into the Warp. There, the Chaos Gods offered him a dark bargain, his life in exchange for his loyalty and the overthrow of the Emperor. Preying on Horus's doubts, ambitions, and feelings of betrayal, the ruinous powers twisted his heart. When Horus awoke, fully healed, he had pledged himself to the service of chaos. Horus began to manipulate the vast imperial military structure under his command, assembling forces loyal to him and subverting the allegiance of several of his brother primarchs. By exploiting their insecurities, grievances, and rivalries, he convinced 8 of the primarchs to join his rebellion. He also gained the support of Kelbor Hal, Fabricator General of Mars, who resented the Emperor's restrictions on technological experimentation. Kelbor Hal's defection split the Mechanicum, giving rise to the Dark Mechanicum, whose adepts embraced forbidden technologies and warp sorcery. In 005.M31, the Horus Heresy began in earnest on the world of Istvan III. Horus used the pretense of quelling a rebellion to deploy loyalist elements of his own legion and those of his allies to the planet's surface. Once the loyalist forces were engaged, Horus ordered an orbital bombardment of virus bombs, intending to exterminate them. However, some loyalist space marines had forewarning of the betrayal and managed to survive. The ensuing battle for Istvan III dragged on for weeks as Horus's forces launched a brutal urban assault to finish off their former comrades. Meanwhile, a contingent of loyalist Death Guard aboard the frigate Eisenstein fled into the Warp with news of Horus's treachery, hoping to warn the Emperor. Following the Istvan III atrocity, Horus fortified his position at Istvan V, expecting a swift imperial counterattack. The Emperor, through Rogel Dorn, dispatched a force of 7 legions to confront Horus. However, unbeknownst to the Loyalists, 4 of these legions had already pledged allegiance to the War Master. When the Loyalist forces landed on Istvan V, the traitor legions turned on their unsuspecting comrades in an event known as the Drop Site Massacre. The betrayal decimated the 3 Loyalist legions, shattering their forces and bolstering Horus's strength. With the Drop Site Massacre, Horus gained the momentum he needed to march on Terra. For 7 years, the galaxy burned as the Civil War raged. Trillions perished as worlds were devastated by battles between Loyalist and traitor forces. In 014.M31, the war culminated in the Siege of Terra. Horus's combined forces laid waste to the Sol system and besieged the Imperial Palace for 55 brutal days. The defense was led by Rogel Dorn and his Imperial Fists, alongside Sanguinius and his Blood Angels, and Jagatai Khan and his White Scars. Despite their valor, the palace's walls were on the verge of collapse. In the final hours of the siege, the Emperor teleported aboard Horus's flagship, Vengeful Spirit, with a strike team of his most loyal warriors, including Sanguinius and Rogel Dorn. Sanguinius encountered Horus first and, despite his strength, was slain after a heroic struggle. The Emperor then confronted Horus in a climactic duel. Empowered by the Chaos Gods, Horus was stronger than ever, but the Emperor, despite his grievous wounds, unleashed the full force of his psychic might. In a final sorrowful act, the Emperor annihilated Horus's soul, ensuring that he could never be resurrected by the Chaos Gods. With Horus dead, the traitor forces lost their cohesion. Loyalist reinforcements led by Robut Guilliman arrived, forcing the surviving traitor legions and the Dark Mechanicum to retreat into the Eye of Terror. The Emperor, however, had paid a terrible price. Mortally wounded, he was placed within the Golden Throne, a life support device that kept his body alive and anchored his consciousness to real space. From there, he continued to guide humanity through the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon vital for interstellar navigation. The heresy left the Imperium in ruins, but it had survived. Yet even as the traitor legions fled, new threats loomed on the galactic horizon. The battle for the Pharos beacon on Sotha had drawn the attention of an ancient and hungry force, the Tyranids. Lured by the psychic beacon of the Astronomicon, their vast hive fleets began their slow, relentless approach toward the Milky Way, heralding a new age of horror for the Imperium. The echoes of the Horus Heresy would continue to shape the galaxy for millennia, as the Imperium stood as both a beacon of hope and a monument to tragedy. The Great Scouring was the Imperium of man's relentless counteroffensive against the traitor legions and their allies, launched in the immediate aftermath of the Horus Heresy. Following the death of Horus and the failure of his forces to capture Terra during the climactic siege of the Imperial Palace, in 014.M31, the surviving traitors fled before the wrath of the vengeful Imperium. Led by Robut Guilliman, the primarch of the Ultramarines and newly appointed Imperial Regent, the Loyalist forces pursued the traitors across the stars, determined to purge the galaxy of their corruption. The Emperor, though mortally wounded and confined to the Golden Throne, had pronounced his final judgment upon the traitors before his physical form was bound to the life support mechanisms. He declared the traitor legions and their allies excommunicate traitoris, forever cast out from the Imperium. He decreed that they must be driven into the Eye of Terror, the warp storm that had swallowed the core worlds of the Aeldari Empire, and be imprisoned within its hellish boundaries for all eternity. Imperial records of the traitor legions were to be expunged to erase their memory from history, as though they had never existed. The Loyalists sought to cleanse the Imperium of all traces of the traitors. Worlds such as Istvan V, where betrayal had reshaped the course of galactic history, were scoured of life to purge them of chaos's stain. The homeworlds of the traitor legions suffered the same fate. The Dark Mechanicum's forges, chaos-tainted Titan legions, night houses, and traitor elements of the Imperial army and navy were destroyed or hunted down and driven into the warp. Despite their initial rout, many traitors managed to escape. Some fled to the Eye of Terror, finding refuge among its twisted realms, while others vanished into unexplored regions of space or retreated to other warp rifts like the Maelstrom. The Great Scouring was a long and grueling conflict, lasting for many solar decades as loyalist forces pursued and fought their treacherous former comrades across the galaxy. Entire star systems corrupted by chaos were purged by fire, their populations exterminated to prevent further spread of heresy. These cleansed systems were placed under the vigilant watch of the newly formed Inquisition, an organization dedicated to rooting out corruption and ensuring that chaos could never again rise unchecked. Yet the scars of betrayal ran deep, and the Emperor's dream of an age of reason and enlightenment was irrevocably shattered. In place of the imperial truth, the Imperium became a grim bastion of repression, superstition, and zealotry, clinging desperately to survival in a hostile galaxy. The Great Scouring marked the end of the hope for unity and progress that had defined the Great Crusade and ushered in the age of the Imperium, 10 millennia of constant war and decline. Though the traitors were driven into the Eye of Terror, their threat was far from ended. The memory of the heresy and the horrors of the Great Scouring became a grim reminder of the Imperium's fragility and the ever-present danger posed by chaos and treachery within. The galaxy would never again know peace, for the Imperium was now a realm built not on dreams of enlightenment, but on survival against an endless tide of darkness. In the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, and amid the grueling campaigns of the Great Scouring, the Second Founding marked a pivotal reformation of the Imperium's military forces. Under the leadership of Robert Guilliman, primarch of the Ultramarines and author of the Codex Astartes, the remaining 9 loyalist Space Marine legions were disbanded and restructured into smaller, more manageable units known as chapters. Each chapter was limited to 1,000 Astartes, as dictated by the Codex, to prevent any future leader from amassing the overwhelming power of an entire legion and threatening the stability of the Imperium as Horus had. The Codex Astartes served as a comprehensive guide that detailed the organization, structure, training, and military doctrine of a chapter of Space Marines. It introduced strict regulations governing how chapters were to operate, outlining everything from battlefield tactics and logistics to heraldry and recruitment. This restructuring transformed the Adeptus Astartes into a rapid deployment and planetary assault force rather than a standing frontline army, reinforcing their role as elite shock troops called upon to strike where the Imperium's need was greatest. Some of the newly formed chapters retained the names, symbols, and traditions of their parent legions. Notable examples included the Ultramarines, Imperial Fists, and White Scars. Others adopted new names and heraldry, creating distinct identities over time and developing their own cultures, beliefs, and practices. These Second Founding chapters, such as the Crimson Fists, Black Templars, and Nova Marines, often traced their lineage and honor back to their primarchs and original legions, proudly continuing their legacy in service to the Imperium. The Second Founding not only dispersed the power of the Space Marines, but also strengthened the Imperium by increasing the number of independent, highly mobile chapters that could respond to threats across the galaxy. However, while the reforms helped safeguard against internal betrayal, they could not erase the deep scars left by the Horus Heresy. Each chapter carries the burden of that dark history, driven by a zealous determination to prevent the Imperium from falling into ruin again. The Adeptus Astartes, though divided into many chapters, remained united in their ultimate purpose, to defend humanity and uphold the legacy of the Emperor in an era defined by unending war. The age of the Imperium began with the end of the Horus Heresy in the early 31st millennium, and spans approximately 10,000 years, continuing to the present. It began in 014.M31 and culminates in the closing days of the 41st millennium, just before the opening of the Great Rift and the start of the era Indomitus. The first phase of this era, the time of Rebirth, saw the Imperium of Man slowly recover from the devastation of the Horus Heresy. Following the retreat of the traitor legions into the Eye of Terror during the Great Scouring, the Imperium experienced a brief period of peace from the servants of the Chaos Gods. However, many alien species that had been suppressed during the Great Crusade took advantage of the Imperium's weakened state and began attacking vulnerable human worlds. To prevent any future rebellion like Horus, Reboot Guilliman enacted sweeping reforms to reshape the Imperium's military and political structure. In his role as Imperial Regent and Lord Commander of the Imperium, he sought to ensure that no individual could amass the same level of power Horus had held. The Imperial Army was divided into two branches, the Astra Militarum, responsible for land-based warfare, and the Navis Imperialis, which commanded naval operations. Each branch had an independent chain of command to prevent centralized control of both ground and space forces. Guilliman also implemented the Codex Astartes, which decreed the division of the Loyalist Space Marine legions into smaller chapters of 1,000 warriors. These chapters, formed during the Second Founding, were given their own starships, fiefdoms, and autonomy, ensuring that no single chapter could threaten the Imperium's stability. This era of peace and rebuilding ended abruptly with the eruption of the War of the Beast from 544-546.M32. The Orcs launched a galaxy-wide invasion, the largest the Imperium had ever faced, eclipsing even the Waaagh! Defeated by the Emperor and Horus during the Ulanor Crusade, entire sectors fell as the Greenskins sought to conquer the galaxy in a wave of destruction. The Imperium only managed to halt the Orcs' advance by resorting to extreme measures which came at a heavy cost, particularly for the Adeptus Astartes. In response to the devastation, the Inquisition was restructured into separate divisions or Ordos to better defend humanity. The Ordo Malleus continued to combat the threat of chaos, while the newly formed Ordo Xenos focused on defending the Imperium from alien menaces. The Ordo Xenos was reinforced with a specialized chamber militant known as the Death Watch, a chapter composed of veteran space marines drawn from different chapters, unified in their mission to eliminate Xenos threats. In the aftermath of the War of the Beast, the Imperium faced further turmoil during the event known as the Beheading in 546.M32. Draken Vangerich, the Grand Master of the Officio Assassinorum, ordered the assassination of the entire High Lords of Terra, who had governed the Imperium in the Emperor's name since the Heresy. Vangorich's coup plunged the Imperium into chaos. In response, a Space Marine retribution force was assembled from the Halo Brethren, Imperial Fists, and Sable Swords chapters. Although the commander of the strike force was assassinated upon landing on Terra, the remaining Astartes pressed on. They fought through a temple guarded by 100 Eversor assassins and reached Vangorich. Only Maximus Thane, chapter master of the Imperial Fists, survived to deliver the killing blow to Vangorich with his bolt pistol. Following the beheading, the Imperium descended into a century of anarchy. Order was only restored when 50 chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, led by Agnathio, chapter master of the Ultramarines, intervened on Terra. Together with his fellow chapter masters, Agnathio appointed 12 new High Lords of Terra in a single session of the Senatorum Imperialis, stabilizing the Imperium once more. The age of the Imperium, forged in the crucible of war and rebellion, continued as an era defined by vigilance, sacrifice, and unending conflict. The scars of betrayal remained fresh, shaping an Imperium driven by duty and the desperate need to survive in a galaxy rife with war, darkness, and ruin. The Forging, often referred to by Imperial historiators as the Golden Age of the Imperium, marked a period of reconstruction and expansion following the Great Scouring and the Age of Rebirth. During this time, the Adeptus Terra brought many human-settled star systems under Imperial control, including those that had been overlooked or unreachable during the Great Crusade. The Imperium's borders expanded as new worlds were reclaimed, and internal stability was strengthened by the establishment of astropathic choirs on countless planets. Key astropath hubs were constructed on heavily fortified worlds like Armageddon, Baka, and Macragge, ensuring a reliable network of superluminal communication across vast distances. Technological stagnation, which had begun during the Age of Strife and worsened after the Heresy, slowed during this era due to the rediscovery of valuable standard template construct (STC) fragments in the Cana system. This find revitalized segments of the Imperium's technological and economic infrastructure, aiding in its expansion and defense against chaos, renegades, heretics, and alien threats. The Emperor's veneration reached new heights as many imperial cults arose, worshipping him as the one true god of humanity. These disparate cults were gradually unified under the Temple of the Savior Emperor, a centralized faith that became known as the Adeptus Ministorum or Ecclesiarchy. By the mid-32 and millennium, the Ecclesiarchy had grown so influential that its leader, the Ecclesiarch, was granted a permanent seat among the High Lords of Terra. In 646.M32, Chapter Master Agnathio of the Ultramarines led over 50 Adeptus Astartes, chapters to Terra, in a demonstration of unity and resolve. This unprecedented gathering ended the political infighting that had plagued the Senatorum Imperialis since the beheading. What was said during their closed session remains unknown, but when the Astartes departed, the High Lords of Terra were restored, their authority unquestioned. The latter years of M32 and early M33 were marked by several enigmatic and catastrophic events. In 888.M32, the Astropath Wars erupted, though the nature of this conflict is obscured in imperial records. 2 decades later, in 910.M32, another mysterious crisis known as the Firestorm unfolded, with little surviving documentation. During the 33rd millennium, the Adeptus Ministorum exerted its growing political power during the War of the Confessor, a brutal conflict that expanded the Ecclesiarchy's holdings, particularly on key shrine worlds. In 265.M33, Admiral Usurs of the Imperial Navy was exiled due to his ambition. Rather than face execution, he was sent on an exploratory mission beyond the galaxy's rim. His astropathic reports detailed the discovery of new star systems for 2 decades before falling silent. The fate of Usurs and his fleet remains unknown. Several notable and troubling events followed. In 313.M33, the Siege of Eternity's Gate occurred, though no further details are available. In 615.M33, the pre-Heresy cruiser Blade of Infinity emerged from the warp, appearing to have been lost over 20,000 years earlier. Its crew sent cryptic warnings before the ship vanished back into the warp, heralding an invasion by Chaos forces. In 831.M33, the Year of the Ghosts saw the honored dead rise across the Segmentum Solar to repel warp-spawned horrors. During the early years of M34, an unknown threat arose beyond the ghost stars, remembered as the Pale Wasting. Imperial records suggest contradictory descriptions, with some accounts referring to a star-spawned plague and others mentioning nightmare engines that decimated entire sectors. This threat led to the loss of several Space Marine chapters and untold billions of souls. The Howling, which began in 401.M34, was a cataclysmic crisis caused by the death of the Cacodominus, a cybernetic alien psyker that had psychically enslaved over 1,300 star systems. The Black Templars ended its reign, but the Cacodominus's death scream resonated through the warp, burning out the minds of billions of astropaths and distorting the Astronomican's beacon. The resulting chaos saw the loss of millions of starships and the collapse of entire subsectors into barbarism. In 666.M34, a massive warp storm from the Eye of Terror heralded the appearance of the first warp stars, gravitational anomalies that consumed ships and small celestial bodies. These cosmic horrors became a persistent threat, luring countless vessels to their doom. In 934.M34, the craft world Ulthwi sent a dire warning to the Imperium, though the content of their message remains unknown. What transpired afterward was lost to time or deliberately suppressed. The Forging was a time of triumph and expansion, but it was also punctuated by moments of profound tragedy and mystery. Though hailed as a golden age, this era foreshadowed the grim challenges that would plague the Imperium in the millennia to come. The Nova Terra Interregnum, also known as the Time of the Twin Empires, was a tumultuous era in Imperial history, during which the Imperium fractured into rival factions for over 900 years between the mid-34 Theyfulth and late 35 Aeth millennia. The rebellion began when the Council of Nova Terra, ruling from Segmentum Pacificus, dismissed the authority of the High Lords of Terra and declared itself the rightful ruler of a breakaway Imperium. This division led to widespread civil war as numerous factions vied for dominance. Even the Adeptus Mechanicus was not immune to the chaos. The Moirai Schism in the 35th millennium was one of the most devastating internal conflicts the Mechanicus had faced since the Horus Heresy. This doctrinal war arose from the heretical teachings of three tech mystics from the Minor Forge world of Moirai, whose prophetic writings called for radical changes to the cult Mechanicus. The schism spread throughout the Mechanicus, Titan legions, and even influenced certain Space Marine chapters, such as the Iron Hands. Moirai itself was eventually obliterated by the rectification fleet of the Fabricator General of Mars, but the war of ideology persisted for over 2,000 years before the heretical doctrine was finally purged. The Nova Terra Interregnum came to an end with the Cataclysm of Souls in 975.M35. During this event, the ecclesiarchy sought to consolidate its power by transforming the Imperium into a formal theocracy. Declaring the Council of Nova Terra heretical, the ecclesiarchy's fervent denouncements led to a wave of religious rebellions. Countless worlds across Segmentum Pacificus rose in war, resulting in the eventual overthrow of the Council. Though the rebellion restored the authority of the High Lords of Terra over the entire Imperium, it came at a heavy cost, with billions dead and the ecclesiarchy's influence strengthened to unprecedented levels. In 980.M35, the Imperium was struck by the Hrud Rising, a massive and destructive conflict against the enigmatic xenos species known for their time-warping abilities and devastating migrations. Shortly after, in 991.M35, the Imperium initiated the 21st founding of Space Marine chapters, later infamously known as the Cursed Founding. This was the largest founding since the Second Founding, and sought to improve upon the genetic templates of the Astartes. On the world of Inculaba, the Mechanicus genitors attempted to refine the flaws inherent in the Astartes gene seed by creating enhanced warriors known as Homo sapiens novus. However, their genetic expertise could not match that of the Emperor and his ancient biotechnical division. Instead of perfecting the gene seed, their experiments resulted in serious mutations and genetic abnormalities within the newly created chapters. Some of these chapters developed such dangerous mutations that they fell under the scrutiny of the Inquisition and were purged by the Grey Knights. Others, unable to withstand the Inquisition's wrath, fled and eventually turned to chaos. The Cursed Founding became a grim reminder of the dangers of tampering with the Emperor's sacred genetic legacy. In 104.M36, the War of Recovery began when rumors of advanced technology in the Mortuum chain reached Mars. Believing that valuable standard template construct (STC) fragments were hidden in the region, the Adeptus Mechanicus launched an ambitious expedition. The campaign escalated into a century-long war as the Mechanicus forces fought to liberate human colonies from xenos control. By the end of the war, the Mechanicus had secured several worlds and returned to Mars with first-generation STC database copies containing blueprints for advanced technologies. This triumph bolstered the Mechanicus's influence, though the cost in lives and resources was immense. The Nova Terra, Interregnum, and the conflicts that followed underscored the fragility of the Imperium, highlighting the constant tension between its various institutions. Though the Imperium was eventually reunited, the scars of these events served as a warning of the chaos that could arise from unchecked ambition and ideological schisms. Despite the restoration of centralized power, the Imperium's history remained one of struggle, sacrifice, and the tenuous balance between unity and division. The Age of Apostasy was a dark and violent era defined by unchecked zealotry, civil war, and ruthless repression. Political division and mistrust, which had been brewing since the Nova Terra Interregnum, reached a devastating peak in the 36th millennium. Corrupt ideologues twisted the word of the Emperor to suit their ambitions, plunging the Imperium into chaos. Around 200.M36, the Reign of Blood began, when Gogi Vandir, a fanatical tyrant, seized control of both the Adeptus Ministorum and the Adeptus Administratum. Through manipulation, coercion, and murder, Vandir consolidated unprecedented power, initiating a brutal regime. His reign saw multiple wars of faith, each a pretext to extend his control across the galaxy. For 70 years, Vandir ruled through fear, his cruelty enforced by his elite warrior bodyguards known as the Brides of the Emperor. The Reign of Blood began to unravel when a man named Sebastian Thor emerged on the world of Dimamar. Leader of the Confederation of Light, an ancient and moderate sect of the imperial cult, Thor condemned Vandir as a traitor to the Emperor. Unlike the power-hungry orthodoxy of the Temple of the Savior Emperor, Thor's teachings emphasized personal faith, humility, and service. His impassioned speeches and unwavering faith inspired billions, igniting a galaxy-wide rebellion. Thor's movement gained momentum as uprisings against Vandir spread. Eventually, Space Marine chapters and Astra Militarum regiments laid siege to Terra itself. The Loyalist forces bombarded Vandir's strongholds from orbit, destroying much of his corrupted support. The decisive moment came when the Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's personal guardians, confronted the Brides of the Emperor and revealed the extent of Vandir's betrayal. Convinced of his treachery, the Brides turned on their master. Vandir was assassinated, and the Reign of Blood ended in a final act of betrayal against the tyrant. In the aftermath, Sebastian Thor was appointed ecclesiarch and implemented sweeping reforms. The Adeptus Ministorum adopted the principles of the Confederation of Light, refocusing the ecclesiarchy on spiritual guidance rather than political domination. However, not all accepted these changes. Supporters of the old orthodoxy went underground, forming a secret faction known as the Temple Tendency, which sought to restore the former authoritarian power of the ecclesiarchy. The Brides of the Emperor were reorganized into the Adepta Sororitas, also known as the Sisters of Battle, who became the military arm of the ecclesiarchy. The sisters' loyalty to the Emperor was absolute, and they would henceforth act as guardians against heresy within the Ministorum itself. At the same time, the Ordo Hereticus was established as a branch of the Inquisition, tasked with rooting out internal threats to the Imperium, ensuring that another figure like Vandir could never rise again. The Age of Apostasy was far from over after Vandir's fall. In 310.M36, the plague of unbelief erupted, driven by a wave of false prophets and rebel leaders who exploited the chaos. The most dangerous of these was Horus, the apostate cardinal of Gathalamor. Horus's heresies led to a devastating rebellion spanning multiple sectors. The conflict was only ended by the martyrdom of Dolan Kirosius, known as the Great Confessor, who sacrificed his life on Gathalamor. His death inspired the planet's population to rise up and overthrow Horus, restoring imperial rule and reaffirming their faith in the Emperor. In 754.M36, the Imperium was shaken by an event known as the Web of Intrigue disaster, though records of this incident remain incomplete or classified. By 989.M36, the strain on the Imperium had grown immense. Warp rifts, including the Eye of Terror, expanded, intensifying the warp's influence across real space. The Golden Throne, sustaining the Emperor's physical form and powering the Astronomicon, required ever more psychers to maintain its function. The tech priests of Mars demanded a dramatic increase in the collection of psychers. In response, the black ships increased their voyages, gathering 4 times the usual tithe of psychers. From this point onward, tens of thousands of psychers were sacrificed daily to maintain the beacon that allowed interstellar travel and communication. The Age of Apostasy left deep scars on the Imperium. Though order was restored, the horrors of religious tyranny and civil war reshaped the Imperium's institutions, strengthening the ecclesiarchy's spiritual authority, but reinforcing the Imperium's obsession with vigilance, sacrifice, and suspicion. It was a time when the Imperium teetered on the edge of annihilation, saved only by the faith and resilience of those who truly believed in the Emperor's vision. The Age of Redemption was a period of intense zeal and fervor as the Imperium sought to atone for the horrors of the Age of Apostasy. Heretic pyres blazed across 1,000 worlds as Imperial citizens sought to purge their sins against the Emperor through acts of retribution and the burning of perceived heretics. The Imperial cult grew stronger than ever, fueled by a desire for redemption through fire and blood. A series of Imperial crusades was launched to reclaim lost territory and push back the encroaching forces of chaos, orcs, and other alien threats. However, the fanatical obsession with crusading in the Emperor's name left many Imperial worlds defenseless as vast sector fleets, space marine chapters, and Astra Militarum regiments were drawn into protracted redemption crusades. This religious frenzy reached dangerous heights, leaving entire sectors vulnerable to attack. In 010.M37, the Imperium was struck by the wrath of the Chaos Sun when the red giant star at the heart of the Maxil Beta system exploded in a cloud of warp flame. Entire worlds within hundreds of light years were consumed, their populations either mutated into abominations or possessed by warp entities. The High Lords of Terra responded by mobilizing nearby forces, including the Grey Knights, a dozen Space Marine chapters, Astra Militarum regiments, and the newly formed Orders Militant of the Adepta Sororitas. The massive campaign that followed helped heal the divisions caused by the treachery of Goga Vandir, uniting the Imperium in a shared struggle against chaos. In 020.M37, the High Lords initiated the Great Cull, a brutal purge within the Adeptus Terra and across Imperial worlds to root out corruption and prevent any future betrayal akin to the Reign of Blood. This widespread cleansing was intended to ensure unwavering faith in the Emperor's divine authority. Among the most devastating conflicts of the Age of Redemption was the Abyssal Crusade of 321.M37. The crusade began when Saint Basilius, a revered living saint of the ecclesiarchy, declared 30 Space Marine chapters lacking in their devotion to the Emperor. These chapters were sent into the Eye of Terror to atone for their perceived sins by purging worlds lost to Slanesh during the fall of the Aeldari. Few ever returned from this deadly penance. Another catastrophic conflict was the Ecclesiad War, which began in 555.M37 when the Apostles of the Blind King, a rogue faction of tech priests, launched a genocidal campaign. Viewing humanity as an affront to the machine god, they used forbidden technology from the Age of Technology to turn stars into supernovae, annihilating entire regions of Segmentum Obscurus. The war ended after the navigator Joyra Macron discovered the palace warship of the Blind King hidden in the warp. Macron guided the Imperial Navy's Dominus Astra to its location, where its lance batteries destroyed the warship, killing the Blind King. Without his leadership, the Apostles of the Blind King were defeated, and their star-killing weapons were locked away in the vaults of Mars. In 754.M37, an ideological movement known as the Children's Crusade swept across the Imperium. Inspired by visions of a better, more tolerant galaxy, countless menials and laborers rebelled against their harsh lives. The movement, popular among the youth, led billions of young pilgrims to seek transport to Terra for a holy pilgrimage. Many were captured by pirates, but the majority vanished into the warp, becoming collectively known as the Lost Crusade. The Heavenfall massacres occurred in 956.M37, though Imperial records provide few details. This tragic event remains shrouded in mystery, another dark chapter in an era defined by both redemption and devastation. The Age of Redemption, though a time of renewed faith and unity, was also marked by unchecked fanaticism, catastrophic wars, and devastating losses. It reinforced the Imperium's reliance on fear, sacrifice, and unyielding devotion, leaving behind a legacy of both heroism and sorrow. In the late 37th millennium, the Tau, a humanoid race native to the arid world of Tau in the Ultima Segmentum, unified under a collectivist philosophy known as the Greater Good. This ideological shift spurred a period of rapid technological advancement and interstellar expansion. The Tau Empire quickly established itself in the eastern fringes of the Milky Way galaxy, colonizing numerous worlds and forming a burgeoning interstellar power. Despite their rapid rise, the Imperium of Man only encountered the Tau Empire relatively late, in 963.M41, during the Battle of Malbede, where the Ultramarines engaged a Tau expeditionary fleet for control of the Cursed World. Due to this late first contact, conflicts between the Imperium and the Tau have been less frequent compared to the Imperium's long-standing wars against species like the Orcs and the Aeldari. As the Tau Empire expanded, it absorbed several other intelligent species into its society, including the Kroot, known for their predatory, adaptive biology, and the Vespid, an insectoid race skilled in aerial combat. Additionally, some human worlds in the eastern fringes defected from the Imperium, lured by the Tau's promises of cooperation and prosperity under the Greater Good. These human defectors, referred to as Guevesa, are considered heretics of the highest order by the Imperium, whose faith demands unwavering loyalty to the Emperor. To Imperial authorities, the Guevesa represent a blasphemous betrayal and a dangerous precedent for other vulnerable human worlds. The Waning was a grim period in Imperial history, when the Imperium's military forces, exhausted from the Redemption Crusades, could no longer defend the galaxy's vast territories. Star systems fell to Orc invasions, chaos uprisings, and rebellion. Entire sectors descended into anarchy, forcing the Administratum to hand over control of many regions to Space Marine chapters, whose unmatched strength was necessary to maintain stability in lawless territories. In 112.M38, the survivors of the Abyssal Crusade returned from the Eye of Terror after purging over 400 worlds. Instead of receiving honor, Chapter Master Konvak Lan of the Vorpal Swords denounced St. Basilius as a false idol, accusing his veneration of being heretical. Within a year, all shrines and relics dedicated to Basilius were destroyed, and the saint's remains, along with relics and followers, were incinerated by being launched into a star. In 666.M38, a horrific event known as the Grim Harvest unfolded when a fleet of twisted space hulks emerged from the warp near Terra. These corrupted starships, some identified as Lost Crusade pilgrim transports, carried mutant and demon-possessed horrors. The Inquisition worked tirelessly to conceal the existence of this fleet and contain its abominations. The conflict of Helica occurred in 001.M39, followed by the Mausolean Cataclysm in 103.M39, though details of both events remain scarce in Imperial records. In 131.M39, the Redemption Crusades began as heroic leaders, reminiscent of the primarchs, arose in each Imperial segmentum to reclaim lost territories. Their combined crusades expanded the Imperium's borders further than they had been in centuries. Yet, after 50 years of triumph, all 5 heroes mysteriously vanished, leading Ecclesiarch Inovian III to declare them Imperial saints who had returned to the Emperor's side. The 12th Black Crusade, also known as the Gothic War, erupted in 139.M41 when Abaddon the Despoiler led Chaos forces from the Eye of Terror into the Gothic sector. Warp storms severed the sector from Imperial reinforcements, allowing Abaddon's armies of Chaos Space Marines, renegade chapters, and demonic hosts to wage a massive campaign of destruction from 139.M41 to 160.M41. The war only ended when Imperial reinforcements arrived as the warp storms dissipated. Despite their defeat, Abaddon's forces escaped with two of the ancient Blackstone fortresses, immense alien constructs capable of devastating entire solar systems. The loss of these powerful artifacts would haunt the Imperium in the millennia to come. The Macarian Crusade began in 392.M41 under the leadership of Lord Commander Solar Macarius, who led the largest Imperial army since the Great Crusade. In just 7 years, Macarius reconquered 1,000 worlds on the Imperium's western fringes, bringing the Emperor's light to regions long lost to darkness. However, upon Macarius's death, the territories he had claimed fractured into civil war and chaos. The resulting Macarian heresy lasted 70 years and was only quelled through the combined efforts of 100 Space Marine chapters. In 500.M41, the event known as the Tears of the Emperor gripped the Imperium. Across Hive worlds, Shrine worlds, and even Feral worlds, billions of people reported visions of the Emperor weeping. Statues of the Emperor were said to shed tears, and stormy skies were believed to reign with the Emperor's sorrow. Pilgrims, priests, and soldiers alike claimed to witness these visions. While interpretations varied, all believed that the Emperor's tears were shed not for himself, but for the suffering of humanity amidst the growing darkness. The Necrons, after their long, great sleep, have begun their resurgence across the galaxy in the 41st millennium, emerging from their tomb worlds to reclaim their former dominion. Many tomb worlds had unknowingly been colonized by human settlers, leading to horrific purges as the Necrons eradicated entire planetary populations. The exact reason for the Necrons' awakening remains unclear, with speculation ranging from the influence of the Tyrannid hive mind to interference by the Adeptus Mechanicus. Official contact with the Necrons began in 963.M41 during the Ultramarines' battle against the Tau over the planet Malbidi, revealed to be a Necron tomb world. Despite their technological mastery, not all Necron tomb worlds survived the eons unscathed. Some were destroyed by natural disasters such as supernovae and tectonic upheavals, while others fell victim to Aeldari retribution or accidental damage from other species. The Necrons' awakening has been sporadic, with some tomb worlds activating during historical events like the Great Crusade or the Nova Terra Interregnum, while others remain dormant even in the era Indomitus. The process of revivification is fraught with danger. Many Necrons emerge with degraded memories or reduced intellect, becoming little more than mindless automatons. Higher-ranking Necron nobility, such as Pharaons and Overlords, were given advanced necrodermis bodies capable of preserving their consciousness, while the common Necrontyr received inferior constructs that reduced them to soulless slaves haunted by faint echoes of their former lives. Tomb worlds are most vulnerable during their awakening, as the energy required to reactivate them can be detected across vast distances, often attracting unwanted attention. In such cases, the initial defense falls to Canoptech, constructs like spiders, scarabs, and wraiths, all controlled by the Tomb World's master program until the Necron nobility is fully revived to take command. The motives of Necron rulers vary. Some dynasties seek to recover lost territories through diplomacy, while others pursue relentless military campaigns or engage in internal politicking to rebuild their ancient glory. Some Pharaons even dream of reversing the curse of biotransference, searching for a way to regain their organic forms. However, without a unified triarch, each dynasty pursues its own goals, often resulting in fragmented and unpredictable campaigns. As more tomb worlds awaken, the galaxy has begun to recognize the coordinated resurgence of the Necron dynasties. Once perceived as isolated alien raids, the Necron incursions are now understood as precursors to a galactic-scale disaster. Some Necron overlords take a calculated approach, consolidating their strength before striking, while others launch immediate attacks to catch neighboring species off guard. In rare cases, Necron rulers offer alien worlds a choice: submit and serve, or be annihilated. These resurgent Necron empires are structured around a central crown world, the seat of the Pharaon's power, surrounded by lesser tomb worlds and holdings. Though diminished compared to their former grandeur, these domains represent the slow, methodical return of the Necron dynasties to their rightful place as rulers of the galaxy, driven by an unrelenting desire to reclaim what was lost 60 million years ago. The time of ending was a period of unprecedented crisis for the Imperium of man, as rebellion, chaos, corruption, and xenos invasions brought mankind to the brink of extinction. The galaxy was engulfed in turmoil, with astropathic pleas for aid flooding in from countless worlds. Yet the Imperium's defenders, from the Astra Militarum to the Adeptus Astartes, were stretched thin, fighting wars on all fronts. The Damocles Gulf Crusade marked the Imperium's first official conflict with the Tau Empire in 742.M41. The conflict ended in a stalemate after the approach of Hive Fleet Behemoth forced the Imperium to withdraw, leaving the Tau to grow as a new xenos power. In 745.M41, the Tyranids made their first incursion into the galaxy, wiping out entire star systems and nearly annihilating the Ultramarines chapter during the Battle of Macragge. As humanity struggled to fend off these horrors, new threats emerged. The Bloodstar campaign in 748.M41 heralded an increase in demonic incursions, while the Great Exodus of 750.M41 saw entire suns extinguished as mysterious Aeldari craftworlds passed through the Argos system. In 757.M4, the zombie plague erupted on Hydra Minoris, unleashing waves of Nurgle-corrupted undead. The Imperium endured countless devastating conflicts, including the Siege of Rox, where a 17-year war ended with a demonic incursion, and the Badab War, where Luft-Huron, the tyrant of Badab, declared his secession and led his astral claws into heresy. Hive Fleet's Kraken and Leviathan continued the Tyranid menace, claiming entire sectors and decimating Space Marine chapters like the Scythes of the Emperor and the Lamenters. In the late M41, the Imperium faced repeated Orc invasions led by warlords like Gazk'Kul Thraka, culminating in the Third War for Armageddon in 998.M41. At the same time, Abaddon the Despoiler launched his 13th Black Crusade in 995.M41, intent on breaching the Cadian Gate. The Chaos Forces, led by the Traitor Legions, unleashed a cataclysmic assault, seeking to tear apart the Imperium itself. In 999.M41, the Imperium faced simultaneous apocalyptic events. The Siege of Fenris saw the Space Wolves defend their homeworld against the Thousand Suns and Magnus the Red, while Hive Fleet Leviathan approached Baal, home of the Blood Angels, even as a demon army led by Kabanda descended upon the system. The Astronomican's flickering light and growing warp storms signaled a dark fate, with countless worlds falling into rebellion, xenos invasions, and chaos corruption. The time of ending culminated in the fall of Cadia, where Abaddon himself led the final assault. Despite the valiant defense of the Imperial forces, the Cadian Gate was shattered, allowing the forces of chaos to pour into the galaxy. As the Tyranids pressed closer to Terra and Hive Fleet, Leviathan continued its inexorable advance, the Imperium's fate hung by a thread. The galaxy teetered on the edge of annihilation, and all of humanity's hopes rested on the Emperor's light to withstand the darkness. The Tyrannic Wars began with the Tyranids' first recorded incursion into the Milky Way galaxy in 745.M41, marking the Imperium's introduction to this extragalactic menace. These conflicts began with the devastating arrival of Hive Fleet Behemoth, a swarm of unimaginable size and destructive capability. Hive Fleet Behemoth made its presence known in the Eastern Fringe, where the Adeptus Mechanicus had established an explorator research station on the planet Tyran. The station identified a string of nearby worlds that had been stripped of all biomass and atmosphere, their surfaces left barren and lifeless. Tyran soon suffered the same fate, consumed entirely by the approaching swarm. An Imperial Inquisitor, Fidus Cryptman, received reports of the destruction and arrived at Tyran to investigate. His team discovered a hidden data codex deep beneath the planet's surface, containing valuable information about the unknown invaders. With this data, Cryptman mapped the pattern of attacks and predicted the course of the oncoming threat. However, his findings came too late to save many nearby systems. A unique Tyranid phenomenon known as the Shadow in the Warp silenced psychic communication and warp travel in affected star systems, cutting planets off from any possible aid. The Hive Fleet, named Behemoth, carved its way into the realm of Ultramar, home to the Ultramarines chapter of the Adeptus Astartes. One of its first conquests was the garden world of Prandium, once celebrated as the Jewel of Ultramar, now reduced to a lifeless rock. The Ultramarines, under the command of Chapter Master Marneus Calgar, launched a desperate campaign to stem the swarm's advance. The conflict culminated in the Battle of Macragge, where Calgar led the entire chapter in a final stand against the Tyranid onslaught. The northern polar fortress of Macragge became the site of a heroic last stand, where the Ultramarines' veteran First Company was wiped out to the last warrior, sacrificing themselves to hold the line. The Hive Fleet was ultimately annihilated with the assistance of the Imperial Navy's Battlefleet Baka and the self-sacrifice of the Emperor-class battleship Dominus Astra. Though Hive Fleet Behemoth was destroyed, the victory came at a dire cost. The losses sustained by the Ultramarines and the Imperium signaled that the Tyranids were not a fleeting threat, but a vast apocalyptic force that could return at any moment with even greater numbers. This conflict marked the beginning of humanity's desperate struggle against a foe unlike any other they had encountered before. The second major Tyranid invasion of the Milky Way galaxy was designated Hive Fleet Kraken. Unlike the unified mass of Hive Fleet Behemoth, Kraken's strategy was far more insidious and complex. It divided itself into numerous smaller splinter fleets, which struck seemingly at random across Imperial space. These splinter fleets overwhelmed entire star systems before reinforcements could respond, spreading devastation like a malignant xenos cancer across the galaxy. The pivotal battle against Hive Fleet Kraken took place on Ikar IV, an Imperial Hive world, in 993.M41. The Imperium's response was formidable, but so was the enemy, the Scythes of the Emperor and Lamenters. Chapters of the Adeptus Astartes bore the brunt of the fighting alongside the Asuriani of craft world Iyanden. Despite their valor and expertise, all three forces suffered catastrophic losses during the conflict. Imperial records recall the staggering scale of the combat. Lieutenant Cage of the Last Chancer's Penal Legion remarked that the Astra Militarum lost over 1 million men at Ikar IV. While this figure may exaggerate the precise number of fallen soldiers, it underscores the desperate and unforgiving nature of the battle. Given that Hive worlds house billions of inhabitants, a loss of this magnitude, though massive, was not entirely unexpected during such a crucial defense. Despite the Imperium's eventual victory at Ikar IV, Hive Fleet Kraken was not entirely eradicated. Instead, it fractured into a multitude of splinter fleets that continued to ravage the galaxy, becoming persistent and deadly threats to isolated systems. As Kraken's remnants spread unchecked, the Imperium had little time to recover before an even greater nightmare emerged. A new and far larger Tyranid Hive fleet descended upon the galaxy, heralding yet another dark chapter in the Tyrannic Wars. The third and most massive wave of Tyranid invasions was led by Hive Fleet Leviathan. Emerging from below the galactic plane in 997.M41, Leviathan struck from two directions simultaneously, cutting off vast regions of the galaxy from Imperial reinforcements. The scale and precision of the attacks were unlike anything the Imperium had faced before, and it became clear that Leviathan posed an existential threat. In response, Inquisitor Fidus Kryptman of the Ordo Xenos enacted a desperate and controversial plan. He orchestrated the redirection of Leviathan's tendrils toward the Orc Empire of Octarius, reasoning that the Tyranids would be slowed by engaging the Orcs in a brutal war of attrition. This gamble paid off initially, as the Tyranids became embroiled in what became known as the Octarius War, clashing with the greenskin hordes in a conflict of staggering proportions. However, concerns quickly arose that the Tyranids might assimilate the highly adaptive and aggressive Orcoid DNA, potentially creating even deadlier bioforms. Leviathan's twin-pronged assault compounded the challenges faced by the Imperium. Concurrent with Leviathan's rampage, splinter fleets from Hive Fleet Kraken continued to threaten Imperial sectors, while genestealer cults lurking within Imperial worlds instigated uprisings timed with the Great Devourer's advances. The Imperium was besieged on multiple fronts, with genestealer insurrections often softening planetary defenses before the Tyranids launched their full-scale invasions. To date, Hive Fleet Behemoth remains the only Tyranid fleet to have attacked as a unified mass rather than dividing into splintered tendrils. Behemoth's failure to diversify its strategy led to its eventual destruction at Macragge, a costly lesson that its successors, Kraken and Leviathan, learned well. Leviathan's multi-directional, coordinated attacks made it far more difficult to counter. Despite the tactical differences between the Hive fleets, the Tyranids' ultimate goal has always remained the same. Their movements have formed a grim pattern, converging ever closer to one inevitable destination: Holy Terra, the heart of the Imperium, and the seat of the Emperor's divine presence. The beacon of the Astronomicon, the psychic lighthouse that guides humanity's ships through the warp, has become a lure for the Great Devourer, promising the richest harvest of biomass the galaxy has ever known. The 13th Black Crusade, led by Abaddon the Despoiler, stands as the most devastating chaos incursion since the Horus Heresy. It marked the culmination of the Long War, as the War Master of Chaos unleashed the combined might of the traitor legions and demonic hosts in an unprecedented assault against the Imperium. Emerging from the Eye of Terror, countless demon worlds emptied their legions into real space, forming a vast tide of corruption and destruction. The first stage of this apocalyptic campaign targeted the Cadian Gate, the linchpin of the Imperium's defenses guarding the approach to Holy Terra. Cadia's fall would grant the forces of chaos a direct path to the heart of humanity's empire. Rumors abounded that demon primarchs themselves led the charge, signaling the end of days. Despite a heroic defense by legendary Imperial forces such as the Black Templars, Space Wolves, Imperial Fists, and the Dark Angels, the tide of chaos proved relentless. After an initial defense against the first wave of the Black Fleet, the Imperial defenders rallied under Lord Castellan Ursarkar E. Creed and the miraculous leadership of Saint Celestine. Yet their valor could only delay the inevitable. When Abaddon arrived in person, he brought with him the Blackstone Fortress Will of Eternity, a superweapon from the Gothic War. Though the mobile fortress phalanx of the Imperial Fists destroyed the Will of Eternity before its warp cannon could annihilate Cadia, Abaddon turned its ruined remains into a colossal meteor. The remains of the Blackstone Fortress crashed into Cadia's surface with devastating force, shattering its continents and triggering catastrophic geothermal collapse. The planet's Blackstone pylons, vital warp-repelling constructs, were destroyed, and the Eye of Terror consumed the world in a cataclysmic warp surge. With Cadia lost, the Eye of Terror expanded, creating the Crimson Path, a corridor of warp instability stretching across the galaxy. Despite securing the Cadian Gate, Abaddon's advance toward Terra stalled due to the fractious nature of his forces and the fierce resistance of remaining Imperial armies. As chaos consolidated its grip on the region, a blighted Chaos Empire formed around the ruins of Cadia. In 986.999.M41, as the galaxy reeled from the devastation of the 13th Black Crusade, the Adeptus Mechanicus brought grim news to the High Lords of Terra. The Golden Throne, the life support system sustaining the Emperor, was failing. Lacking the necessary knowledge to repair the ancient device, the Mechanicus feared that the Emperor's death was imminent. Should he perish, the Imperium of man would be left defenseless, alone in a galaxy consumed by darkness and chaos. The fate of humanity hung by a thread as the time of ending drew ever closer. During the chaos of the 13th Black Crusade, the Tau Empire exploited the Imperium's weakened defenses in the eastern fringe to launch its Third Sphere expansion. This wave of conquests saw the Tau wage several key campaigns, known among Imperial historiators as the Zeist Campaign, the Prefectia Campaign, and the Second Agrellan Campaign. These conflicts led to massive casualties on both sides, with entire worlds reduced to ash in the crossfire. The Tau expansion was eventually halted after the Imperium retaliated with an exterminatus upon the Sept world of Mugulath Bay during the Second Agrellan Campaign, dealing a catastrophic blow to the Xenos Empire. Amid the devastation of the galaxy-spanning war, a series of extraordinary events unfolded that culminated in the resurrection of the Ultramarines Primarch Robut Guilliman. Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Call, an enigmatic figure who had carried out a secret mission for millennia, formed an unexpected alliance with the Inari, a mysterious Aeldari faction devoted to Ennead, the god of the dead. Together, they succeeded in awakening Guilliman from his stasis in the Temple of Correction on Macragge, where he had lain since his mortal wounding during the Heresy. Guilliman's awakening was met with an immediate crisis as Abaddon unleashed a chaos assault on the shrine in an attempt to prevent the Primarch's return. The newly resurrected Guilliman, alongside the Ultramarines and their successor chapters, fought with unmatched fury to repel the Black Legion's forces. After securing Ultramar from the forces of chaos, Guilliman set out on the Terran Crusade, a perilous journey through warp-torn space, to meet his father, the Emperor of Mankind, for the first time in 10,000 years. The details of their meeting within the Imperial Palace remain shrouded in secrecy, but what is known is that Guilliman emerged from the encounter as the newly restored Lord Commander of the Imperium and Imperial Regent. Guilliman swiftly moved to reorganize the Imperium's leadership, purging the corrupt and the incompetent from the ranks of the High Lords of Terra. His return marked the beginning of a new era for the Imperium, one of hope, renewal, and ruthless determination in the face of the galaxy's growing darkness. Following the fall of Cadia during the 13th Black Crusade, the galaxy was split asunder by the creation of the Great Rift. This colossal tear in reality stretched from the Hadex anomaly in the eastern fringe to the farthest reaches of the Segmentum Obscurus in the galactic west. From this wound in space-time erupted warp storms of unprecedented magnitude, reminiscent of the horrors of the Age of Strife. The northern half of the Imperium was severed from Terra, lost in darkness. The immediate aftermath, known as the Noctis Aeterna or the Blackness, plunged the galaxy into despair. Warp travel ceased entirely, astropathic communication was severed, and worlds across the Imperium were isolated and vulnerable. Entire star systems were swallowed by chaos as the Cicatrix Maledictum spread its malevolent influence like a shroud, obscuring the Astronomican's guiding light. The Imperium was divided into two vast realms, the Imperium Sanctus, where the Emperor's light could still be felt, and the Imperium Nihilus, a shadowed expanse where the Astronomican's beacon was lost, leaving those who dwelled there to fend for themselves in isolation and terror. The rise of the Great Rift also heralded the era known as the Psychic Awakening. This phenomenon, dubbed the Age of Witches by Imperial historiators, saw a dramatic surge in the emergence of new psychers and the amplification of existing psychic abilities across the galaxy. The influx of raw warp energy from the Great Rift fueled both catastrophe and wonder, making the Immaterium's influence upon real space stronger than ever before. For the servants of chaos, the increased flow of warp energy empowered demonic incursions, which ravaged planets near the rift and allowed chaos warbands to strike with devastating potency. Yet, even as the warp encroached upon reality, new miracles began to manifest among the faithful of the Imperium. Instances of divine intervention became more frequent as individuals untrained in psychic arts suddenly exhibited miraculous powers. On battlefields ravaged by the horrors of chaos, Sisters of Battle and other devout Imperial servants displayed unprecedented feats of supernatural protection and healing, believed to be manifestations of the Emperor's divine will. The psychic awakening did not only affect humanity. The craft world Aeldari saw their farseers and warlocks wield unprecedented levels of psychic might. Yet such power came with a cost, as uncontrolled energies brought the risk of demonic possession and warp corruption. The awakening also destabilized the agendas of xenos races as the tides of fate shifted unpredictably across the stars. For every world consumed by the forces of the dark gods, there was another saved by a sudden outpouring of inexplicable resilience and faith. The psychic awakening reshaped the destiny of the galaxy, bringing equal parts devastation and hope as all factions struggled to adapt to the new reality born from the era of the Great Rift. As the first waves of warp storms engulfed Holy Terra following the creation of the Great Rift and the onset of the Noctis Eterna, the skies above the throne world churned with crimson fury. A malevolent red haze hung over the capital of humanity, thick with the stench of blood. Khorne, the blood god, driven by his eternal thirst for dominance and destruction, seized the opportunity to claim ultimate glory. In defiance of the other chaos gods, he unleashed his wrath upon the seat of the Emperor's power. 88 cohorts of the demon blood legions surged forth from the warp, descending upon Terra in an apocalyptic assault known as the Red Host. The air thickened with an unnatural mist as rivers of gore spilled from the demon portals. The demons assembled before the Lion's Gate, their singular aim to breach the hallowed Imperial Palace and tear down the Golden Throne itself. The palace's formidable defense arrays and unmatched gun batteries roared in defiance, but even their relentless firepower could not stem the overwhelming tide alone. At the heart of the defense stood Robut Guilliman, newly returned from millennia of stasis and reinstated as the Lord Commander of the Imperium. Clad in the armor of fate, the Primarch led a combined force of Primaris Space Marines, Adeptus Custodes, and the Sisters of Silence in a heroic stand against the demonic horde. The battle was brutal and unrelenting. The Custodians and Sisters of Silence, immune to the psychic horrors of the warp, cleaved through the bloodletters with unmatched precision, while the Primaris Space Marines executed disciplined fire patterns to cut down the charging bloodthirsters. Guilliman himself clashed with demonic champions, each strike of the Emperor's sword burning with righteous fury. Inch by inch, the defenders held their ground until the demon host began to falter. Though Khorne's forces reached the foot of the Lion's Gate, they were ultimately shattered before they could breach the Eternity Gate and defile the Sanctum Imperialis. The Red Host was banished back into the warp, its attempt to claim the throne world for the blood god broken. Upon receiving the shattered essences of his defeated blood legions, Khorne was consumed by an incandescent fury. His bellows of rage shook the brass fortress at the heart of the realm of chaos, and the searing heat of his anger incinerated the 8 mighty bloodthirsters who had led the failed assault. Their essences were obliterated entirely, a testament to the price of failure in Khorne's unforgiving domain. The High Lords of Terra, though victorious, were left shaken by the audacity of chaos. The defenders of the Imperium had held the line, but the ominous truth remained. The Astronomican's light had flickered, and even Holy Terra, the heart of humanity's strength, was no longer beyond the reach of the ruinous powers. Following his heroic defense of Holy Terra during the Battle of the Lion's Gate, Robert Guilliman initiated the Grand Indomitus Crusade, a colossal imperial war effort unparalleled since the Emperor's original Great Crusade over 10 millennia ago. This monumental undertaking assembled the largest concentration of imperial forces seen in the galaxy for thousands of years. At its core, the Indomitus Crusade was led by Guilliman himself, bolstered by the mighty Adeptus Custodes, a contingent of the Silent Sisterhood, and an awe-inspiring host of newly created Primaris Space Marines from the unnumbered suns. These warriors hailed from newly founded chapters born out of the genetic legacies of the original legions. Alongside them marched strike forces from over a dozen pre-existing chapters of Space Marines, with the venerable Imperial Fists leading the vanguard. The war fleets cut a sweeping course through the stars, their mission clear: to liberate besieged worlds and reignite the flame of hope across the Imperium. Guilliman's forces shattered xenos strongholds, annihilated chaos warbands, and broke planet-spanning sieges. On worlds still capable of receiving astropathic communications, the news spread like wildfire. One of the legendary demigods of humanity's past had returned to lead mankind's armies once more. The Indomitus Crusade became the source of countless new legends as Guilliman's armada forged a path of salvation through a war-ravaged galaxy. Worlds that had lost hope in the Emperor's grace found themselves reinvigorated by the sight of the Primarch in gleaming battleplate, wielding the Emperor's sword. His words and deeds rekindled humanity's spirit and inspired millions to stand firm in the face of annihilation. The first major phase of the Indomitus Crusade concluded after over a solar decade of relentless warfare. Its crescendo came at the Battle of Raukos, a pivotal conflict that saw the forces of chaos driven back and the Imperium Sanctus stabilized against further incursions from the Great Rift. Though victorious, Guilliman's duty did not end there. With the Imperium Sanctus temporarily secured, Guilliman shifted his focus to his ancestral home, the realm of Ultramar. His Ultramarines and their successor chapters were locked in a brutal war for survival against the Death Guard Traitor Legion and the plague-ridden hosts of Nurgle. Thus began the Plague Wars, an era of devastation in which Guilliman and his forces sought to purge the filth of chaos and preserve the dream of a brighter future for humanity. After sacrificing the shield worlds of the Cryptus system to delay the Xenos' advance, Hive Fleet Leviathan descended upon the Baal system with a mass so immense that it blotted out the stars. The Blood Angels chapter master, Lord Commander Dante, reinforced Baal's defenses and its twin moons like never before. Refusing to wait for the Tyranids to strike first, Dante deployed preemptive strike forces to ambush and whittle down the incoming swarms. Though hundreds of splinter fleets were destroyed, the Tyranid Hive Fleet adapted with frightening speed, learning from each defeat and pressing ever forward. Dante's desperate plea for aid was answered by the Blood Angels' successor chapters, collectively known as the Sanguinary Brotherhood. The Flesh Terrors arrived first, followed by all successor chapters, save the Lamenters. Even the Knights of Blood, branded excommunicate traitores, defied their status to aid their bloodline in its most desperate hour. Despite this, the defenders were overwhelmed. Hive Fleet Leviathan cleared the entire sector of life before making planetfall upon Baal and her moons. The first 19 waves of Tyranids were repelled at staggering cost. 5 chapter masters perished, with 3 falling during the brutal battle at the Dome of Angels. Baal Secundus was reduced to a barren wasteland, its deserts scoured of life. The remaining Space Marines withdrew to the ruins of their fortress monastery for a final stand as the next wave of Xenos surged downwards. Doom seemed inevitable for the sons of Sanguinius. In the midst of this cataclysm, the galaxy was split by the birth of the Great Rift, a tear in reality unleashed by the 13th Black Crusade. Warp storms engulfed the Baal system, severing Leviathan's hive-mind connection. Baal Prime was overrun, its defenders annihilated. On Baal itself, Dante led his warriors in fighting retreats that seemed increasingly futile. Time warped under the influence of the rift. What felt like days to the Blood Angels could have been years for the rest of the galaxy. As the Blood Angels prepared for their final moments, the stars returned. The Tyranids paused, searching for the psychic signal of their Hive fleet. But it was gone. In its place, an Imperial fleet descended like a host of angels. Raboot Guilliman had arrived at the head of the Indomitus Crusade. Guilliman's forces clashed with the Tyranids in a series of devastating battles, ultimately purging Baal of the xenos threat. Once the planet was secured, Guilliman led efforts to rebuild both the world and the chapter. Reinforcements of Primaris Marines replenished the ranks of the Blood Angels and their successors, fortifying them for the battles ahead. Recognizing Dante's leadership and valor, Guilliman named him Regent of the Imperium Nihilus, entrusting him with the monumental task of reclaiming the war-torn half of the Imperium lost to the Cicatrix Maledictum. Yet, the fate of Hive Fleet Leviathan remained a mystery. Upon the desolate moon of Baal Prime, a chilling clue was discovered. Towering piles of Tyranid skulls arranged in the symbol of the Blood Angel's ancient nemesis, the 8-pillared mark of the bloodthirster Kabanda and his Cornate Legion. The Hive world of Vigilus was a critical link between the Imperium Nihilus and the Imperium Sanctus through the Nachmund Gauntlet, one of the few stable routes through the Great Rift. Recognizing its importance to the survival of the Imperium, the planet became a target for Xenos and Chaos forces, including the Black Legion led by Abaddon the Despoiler. The ensuing conflict became known as the War of Beasts. Despite the combined efforts of multiple Space Marine chapters led by Ultramarines, Chapter Master Marneus Calgar, the Black Legion's invasion was repelled. However, Vigilus remained under constant threat from Orcs, Drukhari, and Genestealer cults, ensuring that the war for the planet was far from over. The Talidus War was a war of faith fought during the era Indomitus between Chaos forces and the Imperium for control of the Shrine World of Benediction, located in the Talidus system of the Veritas subsector. Though Benediction was the primary target, all inhabited worlds in the system came under attack, led by the Word-Bearer's Dark Apostle Cor Ferron. The Word-Bearer's goal was to convert humanity to the worship of the Chaos gods by toppling a shrine world of immense importance to the Imperial religion. The fall of Benediction was seen as a significant step in their plan to cast down the Emperor and claim mankind for the Dark Gods. The war was fought on 3 fronts: Benediction, the Astra Militarum fortress world of Gredask, and the void surrounding the asteroid belt known as the Tears of the Emperor. On Benediction, Cor Ferron's forces nearly captured the Grand Honorificum, a vast cathedral city complex. However, during the Psychic Awakening, an extraordinary event occurred. Those gathered in prayer summoned protective spirits from the warp, forming a psychic barrier known as the Saint's Wall. This shield dispelled many of the demons attacking the cathedral, allowing a demi-company of salamanders to counterattack and secure a defensive perimeter. On Gredask, the Black Templars launched a decisive assault that destroyed the Chaos mobile fortress known as the Soul Harvester, which had devastated the Imperial defenders. However, Castellan Dramos, the Black Templars' commander, was killed during the attack. In the Tears of the Emperor, a fleet of Night Lords commanded by the Chaos battleship Nightmare of Celix lured Imperial ships into ambushes by using captured Imperial astropaths to disorient their navigators. The Night Lords plundered the ships and relished the terror of their victims. The arrival of Vanguard Marines from the White Scar's 10th Brotherhood shifted the tide. Their hit-and-run tactics escalated into a brutal void war as both sides attempted to outmaneuver each other. The White Scars managed to protect incoming Imperial fleets from further ambushes, though they could not eliminate the Night Lords entirely. Though the Imperium has blunted the Chaos assault across the Talida system, the war remains unresolved, and the threat of chaos lingers. The Plague Wars were a campaign led by the demon Primarch Mortarion and the Death Guard Traitor Legion, supported by Nurgle's demons and countless Chaos cultists, aimed at conquering the realm of Ultramar and expanding Nurgle's influence in real space. These wars began after the birth of the Great Rift and the onset of the Noctis Eterna, concluding around 012.M42 when Roboute Guilliman returned from the Indomitus Crusade to bolster Ultramar's defenses. Following the 13th Black Crusade and the fall of Cadia, Nurgle's followers established dominion in the Scourge Stars, a corrupted region from which they launched their invasion. The Death Guard's plague armies struck Ultramar along 100 fronts, spreading death and disease. Despite their resilience, the Ultramar defenders, both Space Marines and mortal soldiers, were overwhelmed. Reinforcements arrived in the form of Primaris Space Marines from Guilliman's Ultima founding, but even they could only slow the Chaos advance. By 012.M, 42, Ultramar's defenders were exhausted, and the Ultramar defense fleet had been devastated by a relentless plague fleet. Guilliman returned from the Indomitus Crusade just in time to stabilize the front and launch a major counteroffensive known as the Spear of Espandor. This maneuver pushed back Nurgle's forces and culminated in a final stand on the world of IAX. The Death Guard Primarch Mortarion was eventually forced to retreat under the cover of a virus bomb detonation, aided by the fact that Nurgle's forces were being attacked in the Scourge Stars by the armies of Khorne. With Mortarion's departure, Ultramar gained a brief respite. Guilliman immediately ordered the rebuilding and purification of Ultramar and implemented new procedures for producing additional Primaris Ultramarines. However, his duties as the Lord Commander of the Imperium soon called him away once more, as the Indomitus Crusade required his leadership in the war-ravaged galaxy. Meanwhile, the Ultramarines remained vigilant, preparing to exact vengeance on the servants of Chaos. The Fourth Tyrannic War began during the era Indomitus, when the largest mass of Hive Fleet Leviathan yet seen launched a massive assault on the western reaches of the Segmentum Pacificus. This region of the galaxy was relatively undefended, as the Imperium's forces were stretched thin, heavily engaged in combating Chaos incursions following the emergence of the Great Rift. The Tyrannid invasion was a coordinated attack from above and below the galactic plane, led by 3 new Leviathan tendrils named Hive Fleet Nautilon, Hive Fleet Promothor, and Hive Fleet Grendilus by Imperial tacticians. These tendrils advanced in parallel, cutting a destructive path with Terra as their ultimate destination in the Segmentum Solar. With most of the Imperium's forces diverted to the Indomitus Crusade and the defense of key regions near the Great Rift, there were few defenders available to hold the line against this unprecedented xenos threat. The opening stages of the war saw entire sectors thrown into chaos as Imperial worlds fell to the swarming Tyrannid bioarmies.